Covered in wounds, the little boy in Minjeol could only sob in despair, feeling as though he had been abandoned by the entire world that day. In his darkest moment, a girl with a radiant smile appeared, earnestly calling out to him and inviting him to go home together. The moment the girl's warm hand grasped his blood-stained hand, Minjeol made up his mind. He looked up at her with eyes full of panic and astonishment, only to hear the little girl's firm promise that, "No matter what happens, I will never abandon you." That oath became the sole light in Minjeol's dark life. Years passed, and at the gates of Palgok High School, a familiar voice called out Joo Arin's name. The girl turned around in startle, her eyes widening in sheer surprise as she recognized the person calling her. It turned out to be Minjeol, the boy from back then who is now a high school student, crying out in pleasant surprise upon realizing they were in the same class. Arin was left speechless by the sudden surprise, while Minjeol shyly pointed and said that not only were they in the same class, but they also sat right next to each other. She playfully scolded him for not letting her know in advance, but then giggled and admitted that she herself had also purposely applied to this school to follow him and create a surprise. Arin playfully nudged Minjeol's arm, teasing him that he looked quite handsome in his uniform. Suddenly receiving a compliment, his cheeks flushed red, and he stammered his thanks in pure happiness. Mustering up all his courage, Minjeol also softly replied that she looked very beautiful in her uniform as well. The unexpected compliment made Arin bashfully cover her mouth, and she playfully asked if he had fallen for her. The teasing remark made Minjeol jump in utter panic, but just then, Arin turned away as she heard her friends calling. She laughed out loud, quickly explaining she was only joking, then waved goodbye and promised to see him later. Sitting alone, Minjeol's heart was still racing as he thought of Joo Arin, his close friend since elementary school. But in his heart, she was not just a friend, but also the girl he had been harboring a secret crush on for a long time. The smile on his face faded as dark memories rushed back, a time when he was pointed at and hated by everyone. A painful past where even the teachers, who were supposed to protect him, joined the crowd in criticizing him. Friends, and even his parents, everyone turned their backs on him during the darkest moment of his life. No one stood by his side. Amidst that collapsing world, Arin was the only one who trusted and courageously stood up to protect him. Thanks to Arin, Minjeol was able to endure those days, only to witness the little girl become the class president to everyone's praise. Since then, he began to admire Arin, watching the figure of the girl who always enthusiastically helped teachers and friends. And without him realizing it, that admiration turned into love, motivating him to make up his mind to confess his feelings before they both entered high school. Back to the present, Arin turned to announce that she was going out to eat with her friends later and invited Minjeol to come along. He hesitated and replied that he was only close to her, which made Arin think he would feel uncomfortable, so she immediately withdrew the invitation. Realizing he had just said something foolish, Minjeol panicked as he understood Arin was just looking out for him, and he prepared to call her back. But it was too late. Arin had already turned to chat excitedly with the other girls about their plans to eat tteokbokki and then go to a karaoke bar. He sat lonely by himself, thinking that he didn't have many friends and felt suffocated if a hangout group exceeded 5 people. In stark contrast to him, Arin was always the center of the class, a radiant and sociable girl loved by everyone. After school, while waiting at the bus stop, Arin was suddenly surprised to see a familiar figure. She stepped over to ask if Minjeol was catching the bus here, which made him confirm it with a bit of embarrassment. It turned out that because she was starting cram school, Arin would be taking this bus on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, a piece of news that made Minjeol overjoyed. While sitting on the bus, Arin suddenly hesitated, seemingly wanting to ask him something. She curiously asked about how he usually studied, an unexpected question that caught Minjeol off guard. Arin sluggishly shared that she only tried to solve her homework at home and tried not to doze off at school. Hearing this, she slumped down in disappointment, sighing that perhaps it was all due to a difference in talent, which Minjeol quickly denied. But Arin only raised her head, her eyes filled with deep emotions, uttering a single word, "I," and then went silent. Minjeol was stunned when Arin suddenly shared that she wanted to go to a university in Seoul and had to start preparing right now. She continued to analyze that if they didn't go to a specialized school, they would most likely end up at high schools near their homes like Yuseok or Sangak. He listened in silence, realizing that Arin already had a very clear plan and was taking steps toward her future. Suddenly, Arin turned to look at him with eyes full of trust, firmly stating that Minjeol could definitely get into a school in Seoul. The unexpected encouragement startled him, and he stammered that he had never thought about that before. But then, unable to hold back his emotions, Minjeol let slip his innermost desire. He wanted to go wherever she went. The sudden words left Arin stunned, while Minjeol frantically waved his hands, cursing himself as a crazy fool for speaking out of turn. Contrary to his expectation, Arin burst into a radiant laugh, excitedly saying that it would be wonderful and they should strive together for that common goal. Her agreement made Minjeol's heart melt, and he was flooded with happiness, silently resolving to make it happen. Since that day, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday afternoons all became special because those were the days he got to take the same bus home with Arin. On the familiar bus, Arin sighed because she couldn't solve her homework, but with just a small hint from Minjeol, she squealed with joy and thanked him profusely. To change the atmosphere, she excitedly showed him a photo of a handsome actor, highly praising his cool smile, while Minjeol naively pointed out that it was from an adult movie. Obsessed with that actor's smile, Minjeol secretly tried using hair wax, but the result in the mirror was a complete mess, leaving him wondering why he failed. As a consequence, the next day, Arin bluntly asked him if he had gone out without washing his hair, a question that froze Minjeol in his tracks. Feeling self-conscious, he threw the wax container into the trash, telling himself that in this state, there was no way he could confess his feelings to Arin. Burying his face in his hands on the desk, an intense desire welled up inside Minjeol. He wanted to change. More precisely, he didn't just want to change himself. He also wanted to become someone who shines as radiantly as Arin herself. As time passed, a friend remarked that Minjeol had been smiling a lot lately. That person was Arin, who curiously asked if his smile was strange, but Minjeol only smiled confidently. And then, with blushing cheeks, Arin suddenly confessed that she thought Minjeol looked truly beautiful whenever he smiled. Arin smiled radiantly, encouraging Minjeol to keep holding onto such a sunny smile from now on. That night lying in bed, Minjeol tossed and turned, thinking about the meaning of the compliment she had never given him before. No matter what the underlying meaning behind those words was, the feeling of being acknowledged by Arin still made Minjeol smile with utter satisfaction and confidence. But that sweetness was soon doused with a bucket of cold water when Arin suddenly chose to sit separately on their familiar bus ride. Minjeol was left dazed in astonishment, unable to comprehend what was happening with his friend. He rushed over, anxiously asking if something had happened that made her sit by herself like that. Arin only quietly denied it, but her avoiding gaze clearly hid an unspeakable trouble. She hastily used her backpack to cover her flushing face, stammering an explanation that she needed some space to think alone. Looking at that strange expression, Minjeol broke into a cold sweat with a bad premonition, inwardly screaming that he was completely doomed. Minjeol walked away despondently in self-torment, fearing that his excessive excitement had accidentally made Arin feel annoyed. Just stepping into the house with swollen eyes, he quickly avoided his mother's worry when she pressed him about whether he had just been crying. The atmosphere suddenly grew heavy when his mother told him to sit down because there was an extremely important matter that the family needed to announce. The truth hit him like a death sentence, leaving Minjeol stunned, because the harshest farewells always tend to come when he least expects them. Under the silent night sky, Arin was stunned and could not believe her ears when she heard the news that Minjeol was about to move far away to Seoul. He choked up as he explained that due to his father's job and to best prepare for the high school entrance exam, he had no choice but to leave, which also meant that his academic path from now on would be tied to a completely unfamiliar high school in the capital. Arin lowered her head in deep sadness, secretly hoping they could still meet occasionally, but then bitterly realizing that the geographical distance would prevent everything. Minjeol's heart tightened, and he inwardly screamed because things had just started to get better with Arin when destiny pulled them apart. Amidst the melancholy atmosphere, Arin's hand gently touched his hand as a lingering comfort, marking a sad ending to their first romantic stirrings. And Minjeol froze at his friend's unexpected initiative, and his already broken heart fluttered for a brief second. Arin earnestly told him that he must contact her after moving away, since he still kept her phone number. A fragile hope ignited in Minjeol's eyes upon hearing Arin promise that if they both got into college in Seoul, they would definitely meet again. However, the harsh reality struck in their 8th grade year, when Minjeol officially had to leave Arin behind to move to the capital. A few years later, amidst the bustling crowd of the city, the boy from back then was still lonely, with an unceasing longing for his old memory. He could only send his thoughts through brief text messages checking in, telling himself to work hard to become worthy, to become a wonderful and radiant person just like Arin. He stood silently under the white falling snow to chew on his oath from years ago. The textbooks and stressful exams gradually took over Minjeol's life in his grueling journey of transformation. He finally gained new friends and a bright smile on his face, secretly wondering if he now had enough courage to confess his feelings. But a cruel twist struck right in their first year of high school, when all contact from Arin suddenly disappeared entirely without a trace. And Minjeol's journey back to his hometown in his senior year of high school began through a sunlit tunnel. He gasped in surprise upon realizing that the old bus stop sign from years ago was still standing tall right there. Minjeol stood frozen in observation, silently noting that this bus stop looked no different from his memory of many years ago. It seemed as though time had forgotten this place, as everything remained intact, making an indescribable emotion swell up in his heart. Suddenly, the figure of an elderly woman sluggishly pulling a heavy cart of goods caught his attention. With his long-cultivated kind nature, Minjeol stepped forward with a bright smile and enthusiastically offered to give the elderly woman a hand. In the fateful spring of his 12th grade year, his family suddenly left the glamorous Seoul to move back to where it all began. Standing on the podium of Sangak High School, he clearly introduced himself as someone who used to live here before moving away and had now officially returned. He flashed his brightest possible smile, sincerely expressing his desire to make friends and spend their senior year happily together. Thunderous applause echoed throughout the classroom, followed by admiring whispers about the new student's handsome looks and curious questions about his past. Minjeol introduced himself as having studied at Palgok, causing a wave of whispers in the class until the teacher asked to start the lesson. Heading toward his assigned seat, he smiled and assured the teacher that his eyesight was still very good despite sitting far in the back. However, the moment he sat down, Minjeol's heart skipped a beat as his eyes desperately realized that Arin was not present here. He remembered with shock what Arin had once said about going to Useok, leaving him with no choice but Sangak because the other school was out of capacity. Despite his heavy disappointment, he still forced a smile to answer the curious group of friends that he had spent 5 years living in the heart of glamorous Seoul. A carefree friend mindlessly pressed him for the reason he left the capital, making the atmosphere suddenly suffocating and awkward until someone intervened. Minjeol only gently replied that it was all right, then briefly explained that everything stemmed from his family's personal circumstances. Painful memories rushed back of when his father's business in Seoul collapsed, forcing him to shut down everything in helplessness and bitterness. Even though his parents tried their best to advise him to stay in Seoul alone to continue his promising education in the best environment, but Minjeol resolutely refused to return to his hometown because deep in his heart, the real reason he was willing to trade everything was because of her. Minjeol had only one sole goal when deciding to return to his hometown, which was to find the figure of Joo Arin again. He tightly clutched the basketball, hesitantly asking his new friends if anyone knew a girl studying at Useok High School. The only response to his anticipation was an incomprehensible silence along with the astonished gazes of his peers. They began to whisper and gossip about the name Joo Arin, revealing that she had also studied at Palgok and was a notorious figure whom everyone knew. Minjeol felt uneasy at their strange attitude, inwardly wondering why they had such a harsh reaction upon mentioning her. The first shock struck when a friend revealed that Arin had actually transferred to this very Sangak High School since her sophomore year and was currently right here. Minjeol was overjoyed and intended to look for her immediately, but the warning that it was very difficult to see her right now stopped him in his tracks. He asked in confusion for the reason, only to hear rumors about a staggering change and a gloomy atmosphere surrounding her. The harsh truth was finally exposed when his friend firmly asserted that Arin was currently in the process of dropping out of school. Minjeol's eyes widened in shock, unable to believe that the girl who was once the light of his life had fallen to such a dead end. Arin skipping school without permission? Minjeol stood frozen by the bus stop, unable to believe what he had just heard. Rumors began to spread as friends whispered to each other that she had caused serious trouble at her old school, which was why she was forced to transfer. He remembered in shock an Arin who had once radiantly shared her fierce dream of setting foot into the gates of a university in Seoul. Everything seemed to have gone off track, but in his heart, Minjeol still insisted on denying all malicious accusations aimed at her. He wondered if this was the reason she had abruptly cut off contact, when suddenly a loud impact echoed from behind. Minjeol turned his head in startle, cautiously following the strange noise coming from a hidden corner of the street. A violent scene unfolded as someone's feet were frantically stomping on a backpack and a pile of ruined homework notebooks. He hid behind a utility pole with his face losing color, silently watching the lonely back of a girl who was trembling with rage. That girl stood panting in the middle of the battlefield of her own making, radiating a terrifyingly gloomy and desperate aura. Looking at the staggering change in his old friend, Minjeol stood stunned, wondering if Arin had truly turned into a crazy person. Minjeol feared that their eyes might meet, thinking to himself that he should pretend he didn't see anything and quietly walk on. But a look of utter shock was clear on his face when he realized he could not turn his back on his old friend's collapse. A decisive action rang out as Minjeol's hand quickly reached out, firmly grasping the wrist of the girl who was losing control. He used all his strength to stop Arin's self-destructive behavior, even though she was in a frenzied state with disheveled hair. Minjeol tremblingly uttered the name Joo Arin in utter disbelief, his eyes never leaving the pitifully exhausted figure in front of him. He looked down at the textbook lying scattered on the ground, the handwriting bearing the name of Sangak High School Grade 12 as a painful confirmation that this was indeed the girl he had once yearned to become, a perfect role model who had motivated his efforts to transform himself over the years. He stood in shock, remembering an Arin who was as gentle as an angel, someone who was once the center of light and always surrounded by the admiration of friends. Yet in front of his eyes right now was only a shattered soul sobbing in despair, with no trace of her past radiant energy. Minjeol stood frozen in the empty field, painfully wondering what cruel thing had broken such a wonderful person as her to this extent. Minjeol stood shocked, unable to stand steady before the brutal reality, inwardly wondering what terrible thing had just happened to the girl he loved. He hastily grabbed Arin's arm, looking painfully at the tears of sorrow streaming down her melancholy and resentful face. Amidst that breakdown, sweet memories suddenly rushed back from a late night when Arin had excitedly praised his outstanding exam results. Minjeol had humbly replied over the phone that no matter how hard he tried, he still couldn't compare to her top position at her prestigious school. Arin had gently expressed her gratitude, affirming that it was Minjeol's encouragement that served as the biggest motivation for her to achieve those results. Hearing her heartfelt words, Minjeol had blushed in embarrassment, thinking to himself that she was the one who had always worked tirelessly all this time. Arin had softly said that having a like-minded friend to study together with made her feel extremely fortunate. Her words were like lighting up the dark room, making Minjeol feel full of hope and determination for the future ahead. She had playfully mentioned that he had grown much taller through photos, then jokingly worried that she might not recognize him when they met again. The call had ended with a dreamy promise of the day they would both get into college in Seoul to stay by each other's side forever. Minjeol smiled with utter satisfaction as he listened to the sweet, heartfelt words from the girl he had always longed for. On the other end of the line, Arin softly whispered that she really wanted to see him again soon, a confession that made the late-night atmosphere incredibly romantic. Surging emotions made Minjeol spring up from his bed with a flushed face, his heart beating wildly with uncontrollable happiness. The call had lasted for over an hour, but when he softly called her name once more, he was only met with a strange silence. With only the sound of even breathing echoing through the receiver, Minjeol secretly guessed that perhaps Arin was too tired and had fallen asleep. And that was indeed the case, as the girl had fallen fast asleep, leaving the phone still connected right next to her pillow. Even though he really wanted to listen to that breathing for a little longer, Minjeol still told himself that hanging up now was the most polite thing to do. The words expressing his deep longing appeared on the screen like a firm promise of a reunion in the near future. He buried himself under the covers, unable to hide his giggles as he thought about the bright future they had envisioned together. But amidst the quiet night sky, he could never have imagined that fateful conversation would be the last time he would ever hear her voice. The summer break passed just like that, and the nightly goodnight text messages from back then still lay completely silent, making Minjeol feel an inescapable sense of unease. Just stepping out of the bathroom, he hastily checked his phone, secretly wondering if she was just too busy with her new life. Minjeol tried to reassure himself while studying that Arin would reply soon. Perhaps she was just busy for a brief few days. However, a week, then a month passed in absolute silence, and fear began to gnaw at the schoolboy's mind. Under the silent night sky at the schoolyard, he persistently made outgoing calls, but they were answered only by hopeless, long-dial tones. Minjeol flipped through the old yearbook, realizing in despair that Arin did not use any social media for him to search for any further clues. He clutched his head in pain upon realizing that Arin was the only friend he was truly close to, and now there was no one left for him to cling to or ask for news. The freezing winter arrived with snow blanketing the tree branches, but his fierce belief that she would contact him soon never faded. Even when standing among new friends under the vibrant cherry blossoms, Minjeol still tormented himself, wondering if he had accidentally made a mistake that drove her away. Tossing and turning as he looked out the window in the dark, he only yearned for an explanation for the sudden disappearance of the girl he had always longed for. Minjeol lay tossing and turning in the dark, feeling that the beautiful future he had once craved had completely vanished in the blink of an eye. He stared intently at his phone screen, where the message from that girl wishing to see him again soon still lingered. His gaze was distant and filled with anxiety, secretly wondering if destiny really held a coincidence for them to return to each other's side. If they actually met again one day, Minjeol wondered what he should say first to erase the distance between them. Standing frozen before the familiar figure he had just found, he felt his throat tighten, and all the words he had prepared for so long suddenly vanished. His heart rate quickened rapidly as his eyes met the brutal reality unfolding right before him. Minjeol recognized her instantly, but his heart shattered when he saw that the radiant Arin of the past was now nothing but a gloomy soul. Her disheveled hair along with her highly cautious and defensive gaze left him completely shocked and filled with pity. Even though darkness covered her face and everything had changed to the point of being unrecognizable, deep down in his heart, he still asserted that this was indeed Joo Arin, and after 5 long years of separation with so many ups and downs, he had finally found her in the most unexpected place. Minjeol tightly grasped her hand, his entire body trembling because he did not know how to start speaking after all those years apart. Arin suddenly yanked her hand back in panic, leaving Minjeol stunned by her harsh reaction. She looked at him with cold, unfamiliar eyes, demanding to know what the hell he thought he was doing. Minjeol rubbed the back of his neck in embarrassment, quickly stammering an apology for his somewhat abrupt action. In his mind right now, thousands of questions arose about the reason she disappeared, the rumors of her being expelled, and this terrifying change. In the middle of the empty field, he mustered up all his courage to utter his name, hoping she still held some memory of Minjeol. He pointed at himself with a forced smile, earnestly asking if she still remembered her close friend from back then. The only response to his anticipation was a blank and emotionless stare, as if Arin had completely forgotten his existence. Suddenly, her eyes flickered violently, and a spark of astonishment flashed when that name touched a hidden corner of her mind. But then Arin lowered her head again, her trembling hands tightly clutching her hemline as if trying to suppress an agonizing pain that had just resurfaced. Arin suddenly shook him off and turned around, running away frantically, leaving Minjeol stunned and unable to react in time. He reached his hand forward in panic, calling out his old friend's name loudly and earnestly begging her to stop. But in her frantic escape, Arin carelessly slipped and tumbled to the ground, causing all the books in her bag to scatter everywhere. Seeing this, Minjeol immediately and flusteredly rummaged through his backpack for bandages while anxiously asking if she was okay. The only response to that concern was a sharp, agitated scream as Arin roared, forbidding him to step any closer. The small girl cowered on the ground with a bleeding knee, her defensive and fearful eyes repeating the command to drive him away from her world. That harsh rejection was like a bucket of cold water splashed in his face, leaving Minjeol standing frozen on the spot, his hands still paused in his bag. His gaze sank, filled with boundless sorrow as he realized that Arin's defensive shell had now become an unfillable chasm. With a shattered heart, the schoolboy silently turned and walked away in utter helplessness, thinking to himself that this feeling was truly painful. A choking pain welled up in his chest as Minjeol bitterly realized that while Arin was the one who fell on the ground, he was the one hurting and bleeding inside. Holding the yearbook in his hands, Minjeol's gaze paused on the radiant smile of Arin, the girl he had gone to great lengths to find for so long. He quickly flipped to the class list of 3 to 1 and realized in shock that this familiar figure had actually been present at this very school all along. The brutal truth struck when Minjeol pieced the timeline together, bitterly discovering that the moment she transferred to Sangak was also the exact time she cruelly cut off all contact with him. Unable to suppress the curiosity burning in his veins, he stepped over to a group of boys in class, pressing them on what on earth had happened to Joo Arin back then. In response to his tense expression, one boy shrugged and said that ever since she first transferred to the school, her behavior had been extremely strange, giving Minjeol a start. He urgently pressed on what that strange attitude was actually like, and his classmate stroked his chin as he recalled, saying that back then she would still answer when spoken to and hung out with a few friends. But the abnormality became clear when the classmate emphasized that she was almost entirely mute and never proactively spoke to anyone. In Minjeol's mind, a vision immediately appeared of Arin withdrawing into a lonely corner of her desk, isolated amidst the noisy crowd, completely passive and letting everything around her go. The classmate clicked his tongue hesitantly, tapping his hand on the desk as if trying to find the perfect words to describe the girl's cold shell. He concluded with a haunting statement that Arin looked completely hollow back then, leaving Minjeol standing frozen as the image of his beloved sinking deep into absolute loneliness pierced straight through his heart. As time passed, Arin gradually became a ghost in her own school as no one bothered to care or talk to her anymore. Minjeol was too stunned to believe his ears, urgently pressing for details about the horrific incident at Useok High School that had forced her to transfer in bitterness. He was met only with sympathetic shakes of heads and warnings about dark rumors that no one dared to mention directly. Just as the truth was about to be revealed, a hand suddenly reached out to cover the informant's mouth, cutting off the story in utter frustration. The group of friends looked at Minjeol with suspicion, questioning how deep his relationship with that notorious girl actually was. Amidst the dense atmosphere of suspicion, Minjeol stood frozen, his mind suddenly pulled back to the days of the past. The radiant figure of Arin with her sunny smile returned like a beautiful film, completely contrasting with the current gloomy reality. He gently nodded in confirmation, his eyes filled with a soft sadness as he admitted the undeniable bond between them. Minjeol bitterly confessed that during his lonely middle school years, Arin was his only friend and the ultimate light of his life. Even though he was advised to cover his ears against the groundless gossip, the fear regarding the secret Arin was hiding began to burn through Minjeol's soul. Minsa panicked for almost letting a slip of the tongue reveal too much, admitting he had always assumed the relationship between Minjeol and that girl was not deep at all. He even mindlessly thought that Minjeol was only handing out pity by agreeing to be friends with an outcast like Arin. Minjeol's gaze lowered, and he painfully wondered how many harsh words Arin had to endure behind her back like this. Suppressing his resentment, he softly asked Seonho if Arin still kept the habit of coming to school every day. Seonho explained that Arin currently only sneaked in to take attendance at the counseling room and then vanished, making her whereabouts more mysterious than ever. Another friend gently nodded in agreement, further adding to the heavy atmosphere draping over the conversation. Suddenly, Seonho remembered that Gina in the next class was also an old student from Palgok, someone who might hold the secret to the incidents at Useok High School. He urged Minjeol to quickly go find Gina, as that girl certainly had a close connection to Arin's past. Minjeol stood dazed, repeating the unfamiliar name Gina, his mind suddenly lighting up with a fragile spark of hope. He thanked them radiantly and left in a hurry, leaving behind the whispers of the schoolgirls who were eagerly questioning Gina about the newly transferred boy. Gina indifferently claimed that she and Minjeol were not close at all, but her action of hastily taking a sip of water betrayed the growing anxiety in her heart. Her friends did not let her off easily, surrounding her to expose the lie and curiously prying about the true nature of the newly transferred handsome boy. Faced with the relentless teasing about whether she used to have a crush on him, Gina suddenly became flustered and tried to avoid everyone's eyes. Blushing furiously, she raised her voice to deny her past feelings, but her friends' teasing laughter showed that the name Minjeol was a scar that had not yet healed. Suddenly, a female student walked in to announce that Minjeol was waiting outside the door and wanted to meet Gina privately to ask about an extremely important matter. Gina froze in surprise, while her friends excitedly pushed her out, not forgetting to tell her to take this opportunity to confront her own heart. Walking in self-torment, she secretly blamed herself for having spoken harsh words, fearing that their long separation would turn the meeting into a suffocating disaster. Facing each other on the empty staircase, Minjeol seriously requested to talk, leaving Gina with nothing to do but gently nod, her heart racing with anticipation. Before he could speak, Gina let out a forced chuckle, deciding to muster all her courage to voice the biggest worry that had been weighing heavily on her soul for so long. She choked up as she asked if he still remembered her existence, leaving Minjeol stunned, his eyes widening in sheer astonishment. Gina asked in disappointment if that was all he remembered, while Minjeol could only tentatively assert that they had attended middle school together. Looking at his clueless face, she bitterly realized that Minjeol truly had no remaining impression of their more distant past. Minjeol gasped as faint memories gradually returned, confirming that they had indeed studied together since elementary school. He sheepishly apologized for his poor memory, while Gina forced a smile and said that they weren't very close back then anyway. Gina secretly felt relieved that he had forgotten, recalling that back in those days, Minjeol only ever clung to Arin without leaving her side for a single step. At the mention of that name, Minjeol's gaze suddenly softened, and he quietly confirmed his deep attachment to his old friend. The air suddenly turned icy when Minjeol unexpectedly revealed that he had just run into Arin again yesterday. Gina's face lost all color, her eyes widening in utter horror as if she had just heard shocking and unbelievable news. She urgently pressed for more details about the meeting, leaving Minjeol to reply with concern that Arin looked so completely unfamiliar now. He painfully recalled the radiant Arin before she moved away, which had now been entirely replaced by a shattered soul. Gina stared intently at Minjeol, questioning if something terrible had just happened to Arin. She hesitated for a long moment before slowly uttering that if she revealed the entire truth to him, she wondered if he would have enough courage to believe her, even upon learning that Arin was actually a criminal. That shock left Minjeol frozen in silence, his eyes widening in utter disbelief as the angel-like image in his heart suddenly shattered. Gina avoided his gaze, asking Minjeol to try to recall what kind of person Arin actually was in reality. She repeated the name Joo Arin with cold distance, wanting him to be honest about what he truly knew about that girl. Minjeol broke into a cold sweat of confusion, stammering a question back about whether Gina actually understood her friend well. Gina admitted she had been by Arin's side for a very long time, but still found her to be an enigma, believing Minjeol was experiencing the exact same thing. An uneasy feeling surged as Minjeol began to doubt the entire period from elementary school until now. He realized he had never once heard Arin confide about her family, her anxieties, or any childhood memory. Not even once. The atmosphere suddenly became suffocating as Gina crossed her arms with deep gravity, revealing to a sweating Minjeol that another horrific incident had also occurred. Those mysterious words left Minjeol feeling breathless, and he tremblingly gasped, desperately asking what on earth had actually taken place, only to be met with Gina's quiet and gloomy gaze as she confronted his utter panic. Gina's eyes darkened, and she slowly confessed that she did not know the details, but all the tragedies originated from their freshman year of high school. That was when a bloody scene appeared as a student from Yuseok High School ended his own life, forcing the police to immediately tape off the area for investigation. A cruel twist struck Minjeol's mind when Gina told him that Arin was present at the scene at that very moment, yet she ruthlessly chose silence and did not report the incident immediately. Even under the flashing lights of the police in the night, Arin resolutely refused to give a detailed statement, indifferently claiming that the male student had chosen death on his own. Although the case was eventually closed due to a lack of evidence, the suspicion of the crowd turned into an invisible sentence, forcing Arin to the point of being unable to continue her studies at UCI. That brutal truth caused Minjeol's pupils to shrink in sheer terror, and he stammered in panic as his intuition screamed that this horrifying story was completely true, leaving Gina's cold confirmation to echo chillingly in the empty staircase. The bloody scene with a cold corpse ended the life of the UCI high school student to the shock of the entire town. Arin stood there with her face and clothes covered in blood, her emotionless gaze making the public firmly believe that she was the one who had murdered her classmate. Minjeol was too shocked to utter a word, his mind shattering as he faced the overly brutal reality regarding the girl he had always loved. The harsh accusations repeatedly replayed in his head, turning Arin's once radiant image into a haunting shadow of a killer. Just when all hope seemed to have faded, Minjeol gritted his teeth and asserted that the angel in his heart could absolutely never be a cold-blooded murderer. Gina softly challenged whether he could still maintain that blind faith if he knew the entire dark truth of what had happened at the scene that year. Sitting dazed during class, Minjeol silently realized Gina only dared to reveal this because she knew for sure he would never be able to accept the truth. He looked out the window with heavy anxiety, questioning if even someone as close as Gina believed Arin had truly committed the crime. To find justice for her, Minjeol began putting pen to paper to record every detail, determined to piece together the shattered memories to find the ultimate truth. The sketch clearly revealed a painful paradox. Arin's own baffling silence at the scene had turned her into the culprit in the eyes of everyone. Minjeol thoughtfully realized that the horrific murder had occurred right in the winter of their sophomore year, the fateful moment when destiny began to shift. That was also when Arin abruptly cut off all contact, leaving a void in his heart with no explanation. He painfully thought about her having to live through the cold rejection of the public, branded with the label of a murderer when she actually was not. Looking at the pile of books scattered all over the floor, Minjeol deeply understood the agonizing pain the girl he loved had to silently endure. She was so exhausted that she had to escape by transferring schools, but this Sangak high school did not bring her a better new start either. He clicked his pen unconsciously, realizing Arin had tried to endure to her absolute limit before choosing to skip school frequently to evade reality. Minjeol wondered why she chose silence instead of speaking up to clear her name, allowing the shadow of doubt to increasingly surround her life. Suddenly, his eyes widened in surprise as a familiar figure brushed past his line of sight outside the classroom window. That haggard and gloomy face was completely different from the radiant Arin in his memory, but his racing heartbeat told him exactly who it was. Minjeol gasped upon realizing that it was indeed Arin, the girl he had been desperately searching for, walking desolately in solitude across the schoolyard. Minjeol startled in surprise upon realizing Arin had showed up at school today, a spark of hope suddenly igniting in his heart. It turned out she only silently came to the counseling room to register her attendance and then hastily avoided everyone like a lonely ghost. The burning desire to face the truth made him unable to sit still, completely ignoring the highly serious class that was taking place. Minjeol made up his mind, raising his hand to call the teacher with a pale face, as if hiding a major secret. He clutched his stomach and grimaced, uttering a lie about a sharp, agonizing pain to successfully ask for permission to go down to the nurse's office immediately. The moment he stepped out of the classroom, the schoolboy frantically bolted like a madman, his legs sprinting quickly toward the school gates. Gina sat in the classroom completely stunned as she witnessed the exemplary student recklessly cutting class in the middle of the day to run away. Standing under the bright sun with heavy breathing, Minjeol quickly wiped away the sweat streaming down his anxious face. He cast his gaze toward the deserted road, silently calculating the only direction that girl could have possibly chosen. Minjeol asserted with certainty that Arin must have gone this way, as it was the only exit leading toward her house. Minjeol ran frantically in haste, telling himself that he was the only one who truly understood what Arin needed at this moment. Because his own past had also once been dyed in darkness, when aggressive bullies intentionally shoved him with brute force. The bullies did not hesitate to smirk and insult him as trash, leaving him to stand frozen and bear the onslaught. The isolation became even more terrifying when classmates openly mocked him as a thief and warned each other to watch out for his presence. A series of malicious rumors about him stealing supplies from the underclassmen kept surrounding him, making the space around Minjeol suffocating. Even the teacher, who should have been the most impartial, ruthlessly forced him to apologize for an accusation with absolutely no evidence. Standing in the staff room with tearful eyes, he bitterly realized the harsh reality that no one was willing to stand by his side. That pain cut even deeper when even his parents doubted their son's character, believing he had learned to lie just to demand useless toys. Lying awake in the dark night, listening to his parents blame each other for his deviant behavior, Minjeol understood that the final bond with his family was completely severed. Every day at school was a prolonged mental torture for him, as his lonely figure had to face the rejection of the entire world. The boy sluggishly walked along the high, precarious wall, telling himself that not a single day would this pain let him go. Minjeol looked into the distance with hollow eyes, his face showing the absolute exhaustion of a shattered soul. Standing before the abyss of despair, he only yearned for one thing, which was to pray for this world to end everything immediately. Humiliation struck right in the middle of class when the girl sitting next to him frantically asked the teacher to change seats, fearing Minjeol would steal her things. The teacher casually agreed and asked the class if anyone was willing to sit next to an outcast like him. Suddenly, a hand resolutely raised high amidst the terrifying silence of his classmates, along with a firm assertion that she would sit there. Ignoring the contemptuous glares directed at her, Arin quietly gathered her books to head toward the boy who was burying his head in pain. Minjeol gasped, realizing that Arin's radiant smile back then was indeed what reached out to rescue him from the abyss of loneliness and darkness. Returning to the present, Minjeol frantically chased after her figure through the darkness, silently understanding what Arin truly yearned for right now. It was not anything overly grand or majestic, but it was also absolutely not a pathetic and meaningless pity. Minjeol exerted all his strength to sprint in haste, his mind only anxious about a single thought of becoming the first person to stand by her side. His eyes filled with determination, silently promising that he would be the only one to listen fully to Arin's tear-filled story. A heartbreaking shout of her name made Arin startle and turn around, her eyes filled with shock as she faced her old friend. Minjeol stood leaning against the wall, panting heavily from exhaustion, but still tried to utter an ironclad oath that this time he would absolutely not let her be alone. Arin stood quietly under the dark underpass, her small figure radiating a melancholy and emptiness so profound it sent shivers down one's spine. The sound of his voice softly calling her name drifted into the quiet space, but it seemed unable to reach Arin's long-frozen soul. The first drops of rain began to fall on the cold pavement, signaling an impending emotional storm about to tear both of them apart. The sky suddenly darkened and unleashed a torrential downpour, as if wanting to wash away all the pain and resentment surrounding the two shattered souls. Standing under the freezing rain, Minjeol covered his mouth in horror upon realizing the terrifying truth lingering in her hollow eyes. The rainwater washed all hope deep into the earth, leaving behind a brutal reality that neither of them could escape anymore. Minjeol came to a sudden halt under the bridge, his breathing heavy as he realized Arin's lonely figure was right before his eyes. He broke into a cold sweat of confusion, his mind chaotic with tens of thousands of questions, not knowing where to begin to clear this suffocating atmosphere. Arin huddled up in the freezing rain, tremblingly asking if he had truly transferred back here just to look for her. That question left Minjeol stunned, unable to believe she had recognized his hidden purpose so quickly. Arin lowered her head, her thin hands tightly clutching her hemline as she admitted that she had also been forced to transfer to Sangak High School due to her family's circumstances. Minjeol urgently explained that he had given up his future in Seoul just to see her once, then clumsily uttered an apology for his suddenness. However, Arin's reaction sent a chill down his spine as she looked at him with eyes full of guilt and horror. Suddenly, the girl bent her body low, choked up as she uttered an apology through her sobs, causing the surrounding space to freeze. The real shock struck when Arin admitted she had intentionally ignored all his text messages and calls over the years without a single word of explanation. She desolately turned her back to walk away, leaving behind a heartbreaking pain along with her confession that she knew he would hate her, but the dark truth of the past had forced her to do so. Arin lowered her head, admitting she had once wished she could disappear from Minjeol's life forever to bury the dark past. Minjeol stood shocked at her harsh self-blame. As Arin asserted, he did not need to understand, because she was indeed the worst person. She suddenly grabbed his hand tightly, tearfully asking if a hard slap to her cheek right now would be enough for him to release all his hatred. Arin pressed Minjeol's hand against her tear-stained face, earnestly begging him to hit her as much as he wanted, until his heart felt lighter. That shock left Minjeol frozen, realizing in disbelief that the once radiant girl was now desperately craving punishment. Arin asserted that even if she were hit 10 or 100 times, she would gladly accept it, as long as he could ease some of the pain of being abandoned for so long, so that after paying back her debt of gratitude, he could ruthlessly leave her behind like a stranger without any lingering attachment or regret. The falling rain signaled a bleak future, where the scars on their souls would continue to haunt and torment both of them for the rest of their lives. Amidst the dark underpass, two small figures stood facing each other in silence, with only the sound of heartbreaking weeping merging with the trickling water. Minjeol softly called Arin's name in utter sorrow, bitterly realizing that the only light of his life had completely gone out. Minjeol pensively realized Arin was under the impression he was angry because she had suddenly cut off contact for 3 long years. He watched in shock, staring at the bleeding wounds on the painfully trembling hands of his old friend. A surge of heartache welled up inside as Minjeol silently wondered if the girl before him was truly as okay as she tried to appear. He shook his head slightly, bitterly asserting that she wasn't okay at all upon hearing Arin press him on why he didn't strike back. Arin screamed in despair, repeatedly begging Minjeol to unleash all his fury on her so her heart could find some relief. Minjeol froze in astonishment, unable to believe the radiant Arin from years ago had become this panicked and shattered. Sobbing, she confessed that she would never be forgiven and was willing to take hundreds of blows just to ease his pain of abandonment. Unable to watch any longer, Minjeol suddenly rushed forward and gripped her trembling shoulders to stop her from continuing to torment herself. He spoke in a low, firm voice, asserting that he would absolutely never hurt her, no matter how cruel the truth of the past might be. Because Arin was the sole reason he had strived to transform himself, studied hard, and yearned to return to his hometown to protect her forever. Looking at the gray sky submerge in the torrential rain, Minjeol tearfully confessed that the sole reason keeping him alive through those days of ultimate despair was because Arin always occupied an incredibly important position in his life, a sincere confession that made the small girl's eyes widen in shock as her hands tightly gripped her hem. With all his restraint, the schoolboy stepped closer with eyes full of sorrow, resolutely saying that he was willing to trade everything just for the yearning to see her once more. Under the dark and cold underpass, two small figures stood facing each other amidst the white sheets of rain, where the heartfelt words just poured out seemed to be drowned out by the sound of falling water. Lowering his face as if to gather more courage, Minjeol hesitantly asked to probe whether the reason she had cruelly cut off all contact with him on that day stemmed from none other than that horrific incident of the past, a seemingly simple question that carried a brutal twist, causing Arin's pupils to dilate repeatedly in utter terror. Unable to maintain her composure before the heart wound that had just been ripped open, she frantically turned her face away to reject reality, leaving Minjeol standing behind with a shocked and heartbroken face. Standing in silence, staring out into the endless rain, Arin panic-strickenly stammered broken and incoherent words, struggling to find a way to avoid facing the psychological ghost clawing at her inner self. Seeing his beloved on the verge of collapsing, Minjeol rushed forward a step and loudly confessed that he had heard everything from Gina, a declaration like a finishing blow that made Arin's face darken with dread. He agonizingly asserted that he knew thoroughly about the bloody tragedy at Useok school, as well as how the public judged her, a rotten and naked reality, just like the carcass of a rat dying and decaying in the dirty puddle of rain out there. Arin stands silently in the freezing rain, but deep within Minjeol's heart, a fierce denial is still surging. He resolutely shouts in the dark underpass that he absolutely never thinks wrongly of her as the public rumors suggest. With tearful eyes and a face etched with pain, Minjeol firmly asserts that he doesn't believe she could ever murder anyone. Arin freezes in shock at that statement, uttering a bewildered question at her old friend's blind faith. She turns back with a sharp, cold gaze, bitterly questioning what right he has to assert such certainty about her character. Minjeol stands frozen before the intense questioning, feeling his throat tighten as he faces the psychological ghosts surrounding Arin. His eyes dilate with tension as his mind frantically searches through every piece of memory to answer why he trusts her so unconditionally. Arin curls her lip into a melancholy smile, challenging whether he would still stand his ground if he heard the full, horrifying truth of that year. She recalls the brutal reality that even those close to her admitted they never understood her nature. So how could someone like him, who had been away for 5 years, truly empathize? Despite all the cruel words, Minjeol decisively grips Arin's bloody hand and asserts in a low voice that only he was the one who could see through her soul. The radiant image of Arin as a child suddenly flashes back, urging Minjeol to believe that he was the only one who saw through her true nature. He shouts into the rain, pressing her on whether she was truly the terrible person the public rumors made her out to be. His steadfastness left Arin stunned, her gaze wavering violently as her long-held cold exterior suddenly shattered. A tear of resentment softly rolls down her pale cheek, a testament to a soul that has endured too much trauma. Unable to bear the brutal truth any longer, Arin suddenly turns and dashes into the torrential rain, leaving Minjeol standing frozen behind. The schoolboy stands frozen in shock, his eyes widening in dismay as he realizes he had just let that figure slip away once more. The dark underpass was now left with only the cold sound of falling rain, swallowing all traces of the small girl into the murky path. Minjeol collapses in utter exhaustion, his heavy sigh merging with the dark night like a lament for their ironic fate. He frantically clutches his head in torment, fearing that his impulsiveness had accidentally pushed Arin deeper into the abyss of despair. Yet, amidst the emotional storm and surrounding regret, Minjeol's gaze suddenly turns sharp as he silently affirms one final certainty. Arin desolately turns her back and walks away, making Minjeol bitterly realize she hadn't changed at all but was only trying to tightly close the door to her heart. Looking up at the gray sky, the schoolboy agonizingly wonders what he had to do to find Arin's radiant smile from years ago once more. The torrential rain poured down on the deserted road, as if wanting to drown out the last fragile spark of hope remaining between them. Arin stands silently in the freezing rain, her small figure radiating an exhaustion and loneliness that was heartbreaking to behold. Her eyes were sunken and hollow, as if every spark of youth had been completely extinguished by the terrifying ghosts of the past. Unable to restrain himself, Minjeol shouts with conviction that Arin was absolutely never the terrible person the rumors claim. Her hands clenched together until they trembled, a fierce internal struggle erupting behind her shell of indifference. She suddenly let out a pained laugh, questioning what she should do in the face of such sincere trust from her old friend. Arin leans against a utility pole in exhaustion, bitterly confessing that the fear of this reunion had made her want to avoid him forever. She collapses in the pouring rain, her desperate sigh merging with the water like a belated plea to their ironic fate. The cold rain poured down like the scream of a shattered soul, signaling the stormy days ahead for the teenage boy. Standing in front of the teacher's office, Minjeol had to face the image of an elite student who had just lost his sanity solely because of an old figure. The teacher saw through the newcomer's confusion, offering a final lenient word but not forgetting to warn about the school's ironclad discipline. The teenage boy bowed his head in silence, but deep inside was a bleeding heart, fearing that Arin would collapse alone in the rain. Stepping out the door, Minjeol ignored the threats of being marked absent. His mind now held only one single goal: to find her. He stood silently in the hallway, torn between the desire to protect and the fear of hurting her once more with his abruptness. The appearance of Gina and her friends felt like a bucket of cold water thrown directly at reality, forcing him to snap out of his melancholic thoughts to face everyone. Gina stared at his soaked uniform, urgently questioning the reason for his crazy action of rushing out into the gathering storm. Minjeol tactfully declined the kind-hearted girl's help, while Gina secretly felt certain that this sudden change was precisely because of that mysterious girl. The schoolboy's eyes suddenly flared with a cold light as he silently resolved to become the sturdiest shield to block every lash of fate aimed at Arin. Gina started and turned around, her eyes full of doubt, asking why Minjeol was looking at her with such a strange expression. The schoolboy awkwardly scratched his head, his face clearly showing tension mixed with sadness after the stormy encounter just now. He gathered all his courage, expressing his wish to speak privately with her immediately to clear up the doubts weighing heavily on his mind. The abrupt request made Gina exclaim in astonishment, while the surrounding friends began to show clear excitement at the good show. They enthusiastically pushed Gina toward Minjeol, making excuses to leave so the two could have private space, completely unaware of the seriousness of the issue. The teasing laughter about a blossoming romance ringing behind her back made Gina blush deeply, only able to awkwardly wave goodbye. When only the two were left, the atmosphere suddenly grew heavy. Gina stood timidly, waiting for a satisfactory explanation from him. Minjeol stood frozen, his eyes turning dark as he formally spoke his name as if to prepare for a fateful conversation. Gina unexpectedly stared deep into his eyes, revealing that she had witnessed him hurriedly leaving school and knew for sure Arin had just appeared at the counseling room. That statement was like a heavy blow to his psyche, making Minjeol realize in shock that the secret of his meeting was no longer a mystery. Returning to the tense conversation in the school hallway, Gina exclaimed in disbelief, demanding to know if Minjeol had actually risked everything just to chase after Arin. Looking at his soaking wet state, she furrowed her brow to confirm if they had even managed to have a proper conversation, receiving only an awkward, bitter scratch of his head in response. Minjeol smiled sheepishly, bitterly admitting that the reunion was incredibly fleeting and that he had completely failed to keep Arin from leaving. His forced smile made the atmosphere even more stifling, and Gina grimaced at his awkward attitude, wondering to herself what on earth was so embarrassing about this. She furiously grabbed Minjeol's collar, yanking it hard as she loudly scolded him to wake up because his foolish actions made him look exactly like some obsessed stalker creep trailing after a girl. Ignoring Minjeol's bewildered expression, Gina crossly reminded him of the severity of having an unexcused absence, emphasizing that they were seniors and a reckless stunt over a girl could ruin his entire future. Gina's sharp warning struck like a sledgehammer, causing Minjeol's pupils to contract as a cold sweat broke out when he suddenly remembered an extremely critical matter. Turning a deaf ear to all her advice, he immediately pressed Gina about Arin's current grades, suspecting that her constant truancy would inevitably lead to a disastrous outcome. Such stubborn defiance left Gina utterly helpless, and she muttered to herself that this idiot hadn't listened to a single word of her warnings, before trailing off with the guess that Arin had probably given up entirely and was preparing to abandon the college entrance exam. Before Gina could even finish her sentence, Minjeol quickly grabbed her shoulders with absolute determination, earnestly begging his old friend for help to pull Arin out of the abyss of despair once and for all. The torrential rain enveloped the school, blending with the cold announcements of the stressful week ahead. The teacher constantly reminded the class of the midterm exams and the consecutive mock tests awaiting them in May. Groans and complaints echoed throughout the classroom as everyone felt suffocated under the weight of a bleak future. Facing the students' protests, the teacher sternly demanded that they grow up, while Minjeol silently slung his backpack over his shoulder and left. While their friends invited Gina to go shopping after school, she unexpectedly declined and told everyone to go ahead without waiting for her. Under her best friend's suspicious gaze, Gina suddenly became flustered, her face flushing slightly as she tried to hide her thoughts. She took a deep breath and confessed that she had a date with Minjeol, news that immediately acted like a bombshell within the group of friends. The girls cheered excitedly, teasing her relentlessly and demanding to know if this was the start of Gina's first love. Gina quickly denied everything, crossly explaining that Minjeol only wanted to ask about their old school, Palga. She tried to act indifferent, telling herself that she would leave immediately after answering his questions since the two of them weren't even close. Looking at Gina radiant among her friends, One could easily mistake this for the beginning of a dreamy school romance. The girls kept teasing her about how relaxed she looked around Minjeol, making Gina turn red and scream in denial out of sheer embarrassment. Once she was alone, she pensively stared at his retreating figure, wondering to herself why this boy was so desperate to find out about Arin. Standing in the empty hallway, Minjeol tearfully poured his heart out, confessing that even though many years had passed, he still couldn't stop agonizing over news of his old friend. Gina fell silent for a moment, her eyes suddenly turning deep as if she were weighing whether he possessed enough strength to face the bitter truth. She unexpectedly stared straight into Minjeol's eyes and bluntly demanded to know if he had truly given his entire heart to Joo Arin. The schoolboy stammered, searching for an excuse, while his bright red face betrayingly exposed the secret he had kept hidden for so long. The atmosphere suddenly froze as Gina spoke in a stern voice, wanting to make absolutely sure that this search was by no means a joke. She coldly recalled the tragic death of the male student that year, declaring that she would never help him if he only viewed this as a thrilling story to satisfy his curiosity. Minjeol stood frozen at his classmate's harshness, realizing that the dark ghost of the past surrounding Arin was truly far more sinister and terrifying than any of the rumors. Standing in front of the teacher's office, Gina hesitantly confessed that even if Minjeol looked at her with a strange expression, she still had to say this. She turned her face away with determination, slowly asserting her absolute belief that Arin would never do such terrible things as the rumors suggested. Hearing this, Minjeol's eyes welled with tears and turned red, and he choked back a sob begging for help because his only burning desire now was to see Arin's radiant smile once more. That tearful plea carrying a desperate love felt like a sledgehammer blow to Gina's mind, causing her pupils to dilate in utter shock. The schoolboy's pathetic sincerity completely broke down Gina's final defensive barrier, and she let out a sigh of compromise, nodding in agreement to help him sort everything out. She gently brushed her messy hair to hide the embarrassment on her face, thinking to herself that she had never seen such a heartbroken and vulnerable expression on him before. The quiet atmosphere of the empty staircase made Gina's chaotic thoughts stand out even more, as she realized in astonishment that the timid middle school boy had now transformed into someone completely different from her memories. Interrupting her drifting thoughts, Minjeol suddenly appeared in a dry gym uniform, waving with a bright, friendly smile as he called out his old friend's name. Standing under the eaves surrounded by the heavy rain, the schoolboy thoughtfully opened his black umbrella and decisively offered to share it if Gina didn't have one, suggesting they talk as they walked to save time. Walking together under the narrow umbrella, Gina couldn't hide her curiosity and questioned if he had always been this friendly, because his current confident and thoughtful manner was the complete opposite of the lonely, timid Minjeol of their middle school days. Gina pensively recalled the past, firmly asserting that the Minjeol of previous years was entirely different from who he was now. That boy used to be a loner with no friends, a tiny voice, and almost zero social skills, leaving Minjeol to only bitterly thank her for her blunt honesty. Under the pouring rain, Gina suddenly fell silent, her eyes scanning her old friend's features as if searching for some familiar trace. She curiously pressed him about the events of the past 5 years, wanting to know what had forged such a resilient Minjeol. The schoolboy hesitantly looked down at his soaked shoes, a moment of doubt flashing across his face before he decided to lay bare his brutal journey of transformation. It was a cycle of waking up at 5 in the morning to train furiously, forcing himself to speak and laugh actively, and burying his head in books to catch up with every trend. Gina froze in shock, tearfully admitting that he must have made an extraordinary effort to overcome his own darkness. Minjeol flashed a radiant smile under the black umbrella, a smile no longer timid, but filled with the self-assurance of someone who had triumphed over fate. He frankly confessed that the sole goal driving him to change himself to the absolute limit was to become someone worthy of standing beside Arin. Gina fell silent at his overwhelming sincerity, secretly understanding that his deep affection for Arin had been the only faith guiding him all this time. Outside class 2-1, a group of friends was excitedly inviting Arin to hang out downtown with another boy named Jujin. The young girl quickly tied her hair back, tactfully declining the invitation on the grounds that she had to go to the cram school immediately. The group of friends looked at each other suggestively, teasingly asking if today was the day she had a date to walk home with Minjeol. One friend wondered why Arin didn't register for the academy's shuttle bus service for convenience and speed. The casual question of whether it was still in time to sign up now made the atmosphere suddenly turn hesitant. Arin ran her fingers through her hair in embarrassment, making the excuse that she liked her current freedom and felt uncomfortable riding with the other students from the center. A knowing smile appeared on Gina's face as she silently confirmed that Arin's secret had been completely seen through. Gina bluntly exposed her friend's inner thoughts by asking if she simply yearned to be close to Minjeol. The friends crowded around to tease Arin about her somewhat nerdy taste in men, causing her to turn red and demand that everyone shut up. They highly praised Minjeol's luck and asserted that the boy must surely be deeply in love with her as well. Gina was in the middle of enthusiastically declaring that with just a word of confession the boy would fall for her instantly when she was suddenly stopped by a hand. Arin lowered her face in extreme embarrassment, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something, but then stopped. She snapped slightly, telling her friend to shut up because her voice was too loud, her face now flushed red with embarrassment. Without waiting another second, Gina playfully waved goodbye and quickly ran off, leaving behind a space filled with awkwardness. Arin's gaze turned sad as she watched her friend's retreating figure, wondering to herself if those jokes had accidentally caused any hurt. Turning to face Minjeol, Gina made a suggestive probe about the reality of their relationship, causing the schoolboy to suddenly fall silent. She looked at him with eyes full of pity, resolving in her heart to bury this brutal truth forever to protect him. Minjeol pressed her about the beginning of the friendship between the two girls, only to freeze at the information that Arin had transferred schools since the 2nd grade. Gina casually took a sip of her drink, firmly asserting that she was the very first person to step into Arin's lonely world back then. The shock of Arin's unfamiliar past left Minjeol stunned, as he suddenly realized he was completely in the dark about everything she had gone through. The stream of memories returns to that fateful bus ride years ago, where their story officially began. Right when Arin was flustered because her bus card showed insufficient funds, Minjeol was standing right behind her. Without a moment's hesitation, the shy boy stepped up and told the driver to charge for 2 youth fares. Sitting in their seats, Minjeol blushed awkwardly and hurriedly promised to pay her back as soon as possible, but Arin just waved it off, saying it was fine since it wasn't even 1,001. He still insisted that things should be fair and square, then suggested she ask for anything she wanted, so he could repay the favor. Minjeol then offered to let her see his notes, an offer Arin happily accepted immediately, thinking that was more than enough. Suddenly, the boy blurted out sincerely that he thought Arin was a truly kind person. That blunt and unexpected compliment made Arin freeze, her eyes widening in surprise. Seeing him look confused, she loudly denied it, making a startled Minjeol ask what was wrong. Arin seriously explained that he shouldn't use the word kind for such a trivial matter, because if overused, the meaning of kindness would gradually fade away. Minjeol was stunned for a moment, then nodded as if he had realized something from her profound philosophy. Arin continued her train of thought, saying that kindness isn't common, but rather an incredibly precious talent. She looked into the distance with a dreamy gaze, confessing that she truly admired such people and always wanted to become like them. Minjeol immediately turned to affirm that he thought someone like Arin was already kind enough, but she instantly waved it off, saying she knew herself best. Through the reflection on the window, Arin looked straight at him with a serious face, asserting that she wasn't a good person. Her eyes grew sharp as she suddenly called Minjeol's name. She abruptly asked him if he knew how to recognize a kind person, leaving Minjeol to only ask back, how? Arin smiled radiantly, pointed 2 fingers at her eyes, and revealed that the secret lies in the eyes. Minjeol's eyes widened in amazement as Arin explained that one could tell a person's true nature just by looking into their eyes. While he was still skeptical, Arin confidently reaffirmed that she could see through everything via the eyes. Minjeol excitedly pointed to himself, suggesting Arin try checking his eyes. But the moment she agreed, the boy panicked and covered his face with his hands in extreme embarrassment. Not letting him escape, Arin leaned in close, used her finger to lift Minjeol's chin, and peered deeply into his eyes searching for an answer. With a pounding heart and flushed cheeks, Minjeol froze as she spoke, saying that through these eyes, he was a person who His reflection shimmered in Aaron's clear eyes, making Minjeol suddenly think to himself, "Isn't she too close to me?" His train of thought was cut off by the scenery outside the window. Right then, the bus suddenly hit a speed bump and shook violently. The jolt caused Aaron to lose her balance, tumbling forward and collapsing right onto Minjeol. The boy froze in place, his face turning red as a ripe tomato as he felt her breath on his face. In the awkwardly silent space, Minjeol stammered Aaron's name, having no idea how to react. By reflex, Minjeol quickly wrapped his arms around Aaron's waist to keep her from falling, anxiously asking if she was okay. Both sat back up properly, the atmosphere becoming incredibly awkward as Aaron covered her mouth in shame, admitting that was quite a scary moment. Minjeol's heart was still thumping, his face flushed from the sudden intimacy. But in the end, Aaron broke the silence with a smile, deliberately changing the subject by asking what they were just talking about. The memory ends, returning to the present. Minjeol buried his face on the desk, bitterly realizing that on that day, he never got the answer he hoped for. Just then, a friend walked into the classroom, about to call Minjeol but suddenly stopped in shock. He was stunned to see another figure present, uttering Aaron's name in astonishment. The friend excitedly shook Minjeol awake, announcing Aaron was in class while teasing him about being alone with Park Gina yesterday. Another friend threw an arm around Minjeol's shoulder and chimed in, prying into what business required them to be alone, even suspecting him of hitting on the new girl less than a month after she transferred. Hearing the conversation, Aaron, who was resting her head on the desk, flinched slightly, a small reaction showing she wasn't sleeping and had heard everything. Minjeol hurriedly waved his hands, insisting he had no such intentions, but his friend Minsu wouldn't let it go, and kept asking what it was then. Another friend smirked, mocking Minsu for being so worked up, then turned to Minjeol with a suggestive look, asking if he thought they were on the same level. Minjeol forced a smile to brush it off, but a strange feeling began to rise within him as he realized Aaron had returned to school after being absent for many days. And yet, why did no one in class have any reaction, just leaving her to bury her face on the desk in absolute isolation? He stood still, silently wondering why no one was happy to see her back, or at least checking in on how she'd been doing during her absence. No one greeted Aaron or even glanced her way. The entire class treated her presence as if she were thin air. Memories of a friend's words flooded back, that as time passed by the second year, no one talked to her anymore, and Aaron herself didn't seem bothered by it. Minjeol's gaze turned sharp and cold. Indignation and heartache surged within him. Without a word of explanation, he abruptly turned and walked decisively away from his bewildered group of friends. Step by step, he approached Aaron's lonely back, as she remained slumped over her desk as if trying to hide from the entire world. Amidst the atmosphere of isolation, Minjeol bravely stepped forward and greeted his old friend who was lying face down on the table. Aaron looked up, her eyes confused and full of wariness as she heard him ask if she had made it home safely last time. Minjeol's action immediately broke the classroom's indifference, and all eyes turned toward the two of them. Unable to stand the attention, Aaron lowered her head, her whole body trembling violently in extreme panic. She suddenly stood up to Minjeol's surprise, like a small animal backed into a corner. Then, without a word of farewell, Aaron rushed out of the classroom, leaving behind stunned gazes. Minjeol could only stand frozen by the empty desk, bitterly watching the back of his friend who had just run away from him once again. During lunch, a friend set down their tray and advised Minjeol not to be too upset because Aaron usually reacts like that when someone talks to her. At the dining table, the group gossiped. One person said this might happen because they were once close, while Minjeol could only admit he didn't expect her to react so harshly. Finally, a male friend looked straight at Minjeol and seriously warned that even if they used to be friends, it was best for him not to get involved with her anymore. Minjeol pressed for a reason, and the friend reminded him that he must have heard some of the rumors surrounding Joo Arin from Gina. He explained that quite a few students in this school believe the rumors about Joo Arin are true. Even though they themselves didn't really care, he warned that if Minjeol tried to be close again, he would be the only one to lose out. Minjeol silently looked at his tray, wondering what that phrase "lose out" actually meant. A flood of memories suddenly rushed back, bringing with it the image of the old Aaron with a radiant smile waving at him. He pensively recalled the first moment Aaron took the initiative to talk to him, and wondered if she, too, had to overcome similar prying eyes and prejudice back then to come to his side. After school, Minjeol didn't go home right away, but quietly went searching for a familiar figure. And then he found her, still with that lonely and distant appearance, standing alone in the schoolyard. Without hesitation, he called Aaron's name, making the girl startle and turn around with a look of pure astonishment. Panting from having run a long distance, Minjeol blurted out that he had finally found her. However, Aaron recoiled in panic as if meeting an enemy, causing him to hurriedly beg her not to run away anymore. Minjeol held out a carton of milk, explaining that he only came here to give her this. He kindly explained that since he didn't see her in the cafeteria, he guessed she had been fasting all day and was worried she would be hungry. Aaron's eyes flickered with a hint of emotion at the sincere concern, and she whispered a tiny thank you. After taking the milk, Minjeol also awkwardly excused himself and said he would see her later. Aaron quietly watched Minjeol's departing figure, indescribable emotions rising within her. The boy stopped, turned his head to look at her, seemingly wanting to say something, but then stopping. She sat dazed and alone in a corner of the yard, looking at the milk in her hand, and then gazing into the distance. Aaron softly called Minjeol's name, but the sound quickly vanished into the wind, leaving a silent atmosphere surrounding her. Minjeol's eyes showed extreme confusion as he stood before Aaron, his face flushing red because he didn't know where to start the conversation. He tried to muster all his courage to approach. Minjeol's awkwardness stood in stark contrast to the quiet atmosphere around Aaron, who stood quietly holding a small milk carton. Silence enveloped Minjeol. He wondered to himself what he could say to break this suffocating atmosphere without frightening her. He was so flustered that he blurted out that he didn't know what to say, his restless emotions on the verge of bursting because this was the moment he had longed for so long. Minjeol glanced at Aaron with eyes full of worry, his heart surging with indescribable emotions as she remained distant and silent like a stranger. Meanwhile, Aaron huddled in a corner of the yard, her sad eyes staring into a void as if questioning the cruel changes in her life. The haunting image of the accident years ago surfaced in Minjeol's mind, the source of all of Aaron's misfortune and negative changes. He realized with a shock that Aaron always intentionally avoided any topic related to that tragic event, as if it were a scar she never wanted to touch. In his heart, Minjeol yearned to ask everything to find the truth, but his kindness prevented him from hurting her fracturing soul. He thought to himself that he should give up the intention of questioning, understanding that for Aaron, bringing up the memory of someone's death was like rubbing salt into a wound that never healed. Minjeol looked at Aaron with empathy. He wanted to help her, but didn't know where to start. He spoke cautiously, asking if Aaron could show him how she used to study. The question about studying left Aaron dazed, as she had neglected it for a very long time. She avoided his gaze, sadly confessing it had been so long since she had studied properly that she couldn't even remember. When he learned she had stopped studying since the first semester of her second year, Minjeol was shocked by how long that period was. He wondered if she had truly abandoned the common goal they once shared. Minjeol pensively thought that whether it was due to the incident or her intentional choice to cut contact, he couldn't know which came first. His eyes looked at Aaron steadfastly, gently suggesting that if she didn't mind, he would like to give her a hand. He expressed a desire to start studying again from the beginning with her, hoping they could try reviewing together once more. Minjeol reminded her of their old goal to get into the same university in Seoul. Even though they had taken a long detour, he believed it was never too late. Aaron looked at Minjeol calmly, expressing that it wasn't too late to start over and confidently asserting she could still support him since her grades were always at the top. Minjeol was silent for a moment, thinking about their plans and changes, then decided to ask if she wanted to try again with him. Aaron listened to his offer, her eyes flickering slightly at the sincerity Minjeol was showing her. Minjeol watched her reaction nervously, anxiety rising as he didn't know how she would decide on this sudden invitation. Silence filled the air. Aaron seemed lost in thoughts that no one could understand. Minjeol kept a steadfast gaze. Despite the obvious confusion on his face, he waited for an answer from his old friend. Aaron's expression suddenly shifted, becoming gentler, which caught Minjeol by surprise. Unexpectedly, Arin stepped very close, whispering an affirmation that Minjeol was still a kind person, a moment that made time seem to stand still. He looked at her, eyes filled with curiosity and a fragile hope that they could reconnect their past. The boy was so shocked he was speechless, while Arin, after her affirmation, looked at him with astonishment as if questioning her own words. Minjeol blankly asked if Arin could check for him whether he was indeed a good person. Just then, a bell rang, cutting through the tension. Arin quickly stood up, saying the bell for class had rung. She urged Minjeol to get to class, but as he stood up, she hesitated, only able to say that she felt. Minjeol asked with worry if she didn't want to go to class with him. Looking into her eyes, the boy was stunned to hear her gently say, "Minjeol, you are still a kind person." That sentence left him completely stunned, his cheeks flushing red with shame and confusion at the unexpected remark. He stammered in shock, asking what she had just said, unable to believe his ears. Arin's eyes were wide with panic, as if she were surprised she had blurted it out. She turned away, stuttering that she would stop by the restroom first to avoid his gaze. Leaving Minjeol alone in the hallway, Arin hurried away, leaving a silence behind her. Minjeol scratched his head in confusion, thinking he still hadn't received a formal answer and telling himself his return wasn't just out of pure kindness. In a corner of the schoolyard, Arin sat quietly looking at the sky, her mind filled with the secret confession that she actually liked him. Her face showed self-reproach. Arin wondered what on earth she was doing and tried to remind herself to stay focused. The bright sunlight pierced the leaves, creating a vibrant scene that contrasted sharply with the dark corners of the girl's heart. Arin lowered her head with deep insecurity, bitterly telling herself that someone seen as a murderer had no right to be happy. Meanwhile, Gina stood frozen on the sidewalk, stunned to see Minjeol's figure walking toward her. The student with the black backpack walked silently down the empty street, unaware he was the center of attention. Gina followed his back, noting that this was the path Minjeol took to school every day. The small girl nervously swallowed, her mind fighting a battle over whether she should step forward and say hello. Finally, Gina stood huddled in a corner with a worried face, wondering if their relationship was close enough for her to greet him naturally. Gina startled herself when she finally decided to face him after so much hesitation. She calculated that when the traffic light turned red, Minjeol would have to stop, providing the perfect chance to say hello. Gina's face flushed red with confusion as she struggled between a normal greeting or using the midterm as an excuse to talk naturally. Walking quietly from behind, she reservedly observed Minjeol's expression while he remained unaware of her presence. Minjeol looked into the distance moodily, making Gina realize he was engrossed in searching for a familiar figure. Curiosity showed on her face. Gina wondered what could attract his full attention to the point of ignoring everything else. The girl's eyes widened in shock when her gaze accidentally caught an unexpected truth. Arin's silhouette walking silently among the crowd appeared, becoming the sole focus of Minjeol's infatuated and worried gaze. Stepping close with a knowing smile, Gina spoke as if she had uncovered the secret thoughts he had been hiding. She bluntly asked if he really liked Joo Arin that much, making Minjeol jump in panic and shout from the sudden scare. The classroom atmosphere suddenly became tense when the teacher announced that the whole class had to start rearranging the desks and chairs according to the exam room layout for the upcoming midterm exams. Minjeol sighed while heavily lifting the wooden desk, admitting that he was completely unprepared for this exam and that it would surely be a disaster. Meanwhile, Arin sat quietly at the front in an extremely anxious mood, thinking to herself that the fear was making her feel so pressured she wanted to vomit. Minjeol glanced slightly toward the back. Even though he hadn't received an answer in the past, seeing her show up at school today made him feel like the distance between them had gradually narrowed. He secretly felt regretful upon realizing that their current exam seats were too far apart, no longer close like in the old days. Because Minjeol had only just transferred schools mid-semester, his attendance number was placed at the very end in the 33rd position, separated from the rest of the class list. As he held his pen preparing to start the test, his mind suddenly drifted back to distant memories from the early years when they were still in middle school. Minjeol used to love exams because back then his number was 16 and Erin's was 17, an incredibly close and memorable distance. He fondly recalled the moment when Erin mischievously turned around and suggested they agree on some private signals to communicate during the exam, which left him completely stunned. Looking at Erin's radiant smile as she quickly clarified it was just a joke, Minjeol could only freeze and wonder to himself if she was actually teasing him. Erin focused intently while mumbling math formulas, showing a serious attitude quite different from her usual self as the important exam approached. Being reminded by the proctor to put away her materials as the exam started, Erin jumped and hurriedly apologized while her face still clearly showed embarrassment and tension. In reality, her scores were always very high. It was Erin's extreme solemnity during every exam that left a deep impression on her friends' minds. Minjeol silently admired the image of an Erin who always gave her best, diligently putting pen to paper with all the determination of an elite student. The warning bell rang, cutting through the stream of memories as the teacher began distributing the exam papers in the suffocating silence of the classroom. Minjeol was startled the moment the exam paper was placed on his desk. A sudden feeling of nervousness made his breathing more rapid than usual. He found the literature exam truly difficult, especially since the troubles following his transfer had made it impossible for him to focus on proper studying. Sitting silently before the paper, Minjeol still couldn't stop himself from worrying, wondering if Erin was strong enough to get through this test. In a corner of the class, Erin sat dazed with a tired and lonely appearance, seemingly surrounded by invisible psychological pressures that were hard to escape. Her sad eyes stared into the void, letting memories of her childhood suddenly flood back, haunting and agonizing her mind. Erin secretly believed that this multiple-choice answer sheet was the only lighthouse guiding her toward a bright future. Every time she put her pen down to bubble in the blank spaces on the paper, she felt her breathing quicken and become filled with expectation. Because she always believed that every correct answer would light up another lamp of hope, making the road ahead more brilliant than ever. Erin had dedicated so much effort to memorizing knowledge, diligently solving each difficult math problem and refining every word during exams. However, while Minjeol was still lost in noisy conversations among the crowd, a cruel turning point had occurred. Ever since that horrific incident, Erin could only huddle in isolation in the middle of the classroom, letting the ghosts of the past besiege her mind. The tip of her ballpoint pen stalled on the pure white paper as she bitterly realized that not a single piece of knowledge could enter her mind anymore. Sweat broke out on her panic-stricken face as Erin painfully realized that no matter how hard she tried to remember or solve problems, everything was in vain. She felt so stupid now that her mind was completely empty, leaving the pen lying abandoned on the hopeless answer sheet. Every brilliant lamp of the future from back then now flickered out one by one, leaving Erin to sink deep into the thick darkness of despair. As the future gradually sank into murky darkness, Erin felt as though she no longer had enough strength to see any ray of light ahead. Watching the lamps of hope fade away one by one, she bitterly realized she had completely lost her direction in a life full of injustice. Lost in the pitch-black void, the young girl stood still because she felt her legs were too exhausted, unable to be lifted for even one more step. A thought of escape suddenly flashed in Erin's mind like a poisonous medicine soothing the pain she had been enduring for so long. She told herself that perhaps she didn't need to strive forward, because just standing still would make everything easier. Huddling in the deep darkness, Erin believed that if she had no expectations for the future, she would no longer have to hate herself for her stupidity. That was what she had once planned to protect her shattered soul, yet the harsh reality before her eyes made that belief begin to shake violently. She closed her tired eyes tightly, trying to suppress the turmoil happening inside a heart already riddled with unhealed scars. Suddenly, Minjeol approached, affirming he would help her and sincerely asking if Erin wanted to try starting to study all over again with him. Erin looked up slightly with eyes full of doubt, an intense hesitation rising in her heart as she wondered if she truly deserved that kindness. Standing on the brink of collapse, Erin privately questioned whether she could escape this dark quagmire if she was brave enough to take the hand reaching out to her. The classroom door suddenly burst open, and a male student excitedly held a piece of paper, announcing to the whole class that the official exam answers were out. The reading of the answers sounded steadily, mixed with disappointed groans from students realizing they had made mistakes, creating a chaotic atmosphere. Amidst that excitement, Minjeol sat silently with a pensive face. It seemed all his attention right now was focused entirely on the girl sitting up front. Looking toward the empty seat, he felt a momentary sense of loss and wondered if Arin had quietly left the exam room before he could say a word. Minjeol hurriedly packed his things to head out, his heart still harboring the intention to find Arin, so they could share a few words after the stressful exam hours. He suddenly froze in surprise upon discovering Arin's familiar figure still leaning against a stone pillar in the quiet schoolyard. Minjeol's eyes clearly showed joy mixed with curiosity. He softly asked with surprise why she was still here instead of going home. Arin lowered her face shyly, admitting in a low voice that she just wanted to linger here a little longer. Minjeol's face suddenly brightened, a strong flicker of hope igniting within him that his sincerity seemed to have started touching her soul. Minjeol stole a look at Arin with his heart pounding, questioning himself whether she was actually standing there waiting for him. He quickly tapped his own head to wake up from his fanciful thoughts, constantly reminding himself not to misunderstand and to stay grounded. Although his face was still red with embarrassment, Minjeol tried to regain his composure to start a conversation, but the words caught in his throat. He lowered his voice and suggested they walk home together, while Arin's eyes still held a melancholy, distant look. At that sincere invitation, Arin nodded slightly in agreement, her trembling hands clutching the hem of her shirt as if trying to find a mental anchor. The two walked silently together amidst the noise of passing traffic, each step carrying private thoughts that couldn't be voiced. Minjeol tried to break the silence by warmly asking Arin if she did well on today's midterm exams. Receiving a sad negative answer, he hurriedly apologized for remembering her studies had been interrupted for a long time, but Arin just softly replied that everything was fine. Minjeol's gaze suddenly became firm. He decided to repeat his offer to help her with her studies that he had mentioned before. Standing before the small, bowed back, he sincerely asked Arin what she thought about letting him help her start everything over from scratch. Arin blinked hesitantly, her mind filled with intense conflict as she wondered if taking Minjeol's hand could help her escape the dark abyss. She walked silently beside him along the empty road, then suddenly confessed in a trembling voice that she was feeling extremely afraid. Arin clutched the hem of her shirt with deep insecurity, fearing that being with Minjeol would make her weak enough to tell all her secrets and start over-relying on him. Minjeol was momentarily stunned, his eyes showing heartache as he saw the fragile and wounded appearance of his old friend. He leaned in close, using the warmest voice possible to assure Arin that she absolutely did not need to be afraid of anything anymore. Minjeol looked steadfastly into her sad eyes and promised that she could tell him everything, while also telling her to lean on him as much as she wanted. In the quiet space with only the two of them, Arin glanced at his dangling hands and whispered, asking if that was truly okay. She rested her head on his shoulder wearily, chokingly wondering if Minjeol would still treat her well after knowing the full dark truth of the past. Minjeol froze when he heard Arin agonizingly ask if he would still stay by her side, if she had truly committed something truly horrific. He gently accepted Arin's vulnerability and curiously asked back what kind of terrible thing she had been hiding all this time. Arin hesitated slightly, her dark eyes staring deep into the void as she began to give a haunting example of the secret she had been keeping. Her voice trembled as she uttered the word murder, causing the surrounding atmosphere to suddenly become cold and suffocatingly heavy. Minjeol stood rooted to the spot, shock evident on his face as those horrific words reached his ears. Arin suddenly slumped her head against Minjeol's chest, her small body trembling violently like a creature on the verge of a total breakdown. In his mind, Minjeol silently cried out that things were indeed as he had feared, but his heart ached with pity. Arin looked up at him with eyes full of guilt, bitterly asking if such a crime could ever be forgiven. Without waiting for an answer, she hurriedly begged him to act as if he hadn't heard anything and turned to flee in panic, leaving Minjeol calling her name in vain. Minjeol's eyes widened in horror as he saw the danger lurking for his friend in that fateful moment. He shouted at Arin to stop immediately as he saw her ignore the red light and dash straight into the street just as a car was speeding toward her. The blinding headlights enveloped Arin's small figure, signaling a horrific collision about to happen right before Minjeol's eyes. Minjeol screamed for Arin to be careful as she stood motionless before the danger rushing right at her. He hurriedly reached out his hand in extreme panic, sweat breaking out on his skin as he tried to snatch her from the hands of death. A near miss occurred in the blink of an eye, making the entire world seem to turn upside down and blur due to the excessive speed. The car coldly sped past on the empty street, leaving behind a haunting scene where a tragedy had nearly become a reality. Minjeol held Arin tightly in his arms as they both tumbled to the ground, his breathing rapid as the fear had not yet subsided in his chest. He frantically asked if Arin was hurt anywhere, his face clearly showing extreme worry for the girl he cherished. Arin was completely silent, burying her head in his chest and trembling violently like a small creature trying to find a safe anchor. Minjeol was momentarily stunned as he felt the massive shock in the young girl's soul, wondering if she had been scared half to death. The tears rolling down Arin's cheeks along with her choked sobs in his arms made the atmosphere suddenly heavy with sorrow. Holding the sobbing girl, Minjeol firmly asserted in his heart that someone as fragile as her could absolutely not have committed that crime. Minjeol tightened his grip on Arin's trembling shoulders, telling himself in his heart that even if she really did have a hand in that crime, he anxiously leaned his face in close to check on her, urgently asking if Arin was truly okay after the shock she just had. Arin choked out an apology through her falling tears, despairingly confessing that it would be better for her to continue living a secluded life as she was now. Minjeol's gaze suddenly sharpened with determination, a bold thought beginning to spark in his mind at this fateful moment. In the middle of the quiet street corner, he opened his arms wide to embrace Arin's slender figure and sincerely asked her to trust and lean on him. Their hands clasped tightly together like an unbreakable vow, Minjeol affirmed that today he had completely made up his mind. He buried his face in her shoulder, whispering that if Arin had truly committed those horrific things as she just admitted, then, no matter what happened, he was ready to become an accomplice to bear and protect that dark secret with her until the end. Arin was so stunned she forgot to cry, her eyes clearly showing shock at Minjeol's crazy declaration that was filled with deep affection. Looking directly into the shattered soul of his old friend, Minjeol firmly asserted that he would absolutely never abandon her again. Minjeol sat silently in the intersection, holding Arin tightly and silently affirming that even if this choice made the whole world turn its back on him, he would still steadfastly protect her to the end. Standing in the schoolyard, Gina suddenly froze when she unexpectedly spotted a familiar figure. The silhouette of Minjeol standing alone in deep thought couldn't help but arouse her curiosity. Gina secretly called out Minjeol's name, wondering if he was on his way home. Thinking that this was the perfect opportunity, she decided she would walk over and greet him right now. Gina was just about to call out Minjeol's name when she suddenly stopped short, her eyes wide with shock at the scene before her, because she realized he was not alone at all, but was standing with Arin, who was shyly hiding behind the corner of the wall. Gina froze, her mind in a state of chaos upon realizing that Arin was also there with Minjeol. From afar, a crowd of students began to whisper and gossip, never expecting that Minjeol would be so close to Joo Arin. A female student smirked with malice, making a sarcastic comment that perhaps he was trying to seduce an unstable psycho to do something bad. They looked at the backs of the two, venomously speculating whether Minjeol was also about to lose his life, while another said they didn't expect him to be that kind of person. Gina thought gloomily that if Minjeol got close to Arin, he would gain nothing but only lose. She suddenly remembered Minjeol's tearful eyes, along with his sole desire that Arin could smile like she used to, and also the confession that he had always wanted to become someone worthy of Arin. At night, Gina was still tossing and turning, unable to sleep, her mind troubled by those thoughts. She sat up straight, telling herself that with a person like him, advising him not to get close to Arin was pointless, then wondered if Minjeol actually believed Arin was innocent. Gina lay back down on the bed, secretly thinking that if that was the case, then she recalled the moment she had questioned Minjeol, asking suspiciously that don't tell her he had followed Joo Arin. Lying on the bed, Gina's eyes became unusually determined. She secretly affirmed that the current and Minjeol could no longer look at the situation objectively. Gina tossed and turned in thought, wondering if he would automatically keep his distance from her if he discovered Arin was not innocent at all. Gina realized how dangerous it was for Minjeol to be by Arin's side right now. She believed that someone needed to tell him that, while Minjeol had just texted to ask Arin if she had arrived home safely. The boy nervously swallowed his saliva, anxiously waiting for a text reply. He tried to reassure himself, secretly thinking that perhaps she would not reply right away and that it was better to stop thinking about it. Suddenly, the notification sound went off, making Minjeol jump, quickly grabbing his phone with a face full of hope. But the joy quickly vanished when it was just a meaningless promotional message. Minjeol buried his face on the desk, sighing heavily as he realized he couldn't even focus on doing anything else. After a while of torment, his eyes suddenly became determined, secretly making up his mind. Since that day, they had walked home together a few more times, until one day Minjeol called Arin's name. Minjeol gathered all his courage, hesitantly asking Arin if her phone number was still the same as before. Minjeol's question made Arin freeze for a moment, her eyes showing clear surprise. Seeing this, Minjeol quickly held out his phone, responding joyfully when he heard Arin say that she would give him her number right now. After saving the number, he gently reminded Arin that if anything happened, she should feel free to contact him. Minjeol hesitated, saying that and, making Arin curious as to what he meant. Arin's eyes watched him intently, waiting for what he was about to say. She unexpectedly spoke first, asking about his offer to tutor her, then suggested whether after school would be okay. Arin's agreement made Minjeol's heart skip a beat. He joyfully realized that their first study session would begin tomorrow, right after the exams ended. Returning home, he began to make a plan, thinking that given Arin's situation, it was best to start over from the basic knowledge of the 10th grade. He decided to start with math, knowing that Arin had always been weak in this subject. Right at that moment, an unexpected notification rang out, making Minjeol startle and quickly grab his phone. Minjeol stared blankly at his phone screen, not understanding why his mother was calling him so urgently. He searched for the address written in the text, a quiet, spicy braised chicken ribs restaurant sitting by the roadside. The moment he stepped through the door, Minjeol felt an unusually serious atmosphere awaiting him. He froze when he saw both his father and mother already sitting at the table, his mother waving to inform him that she had finished ordering the food. Looking at the hot bowl of soup, his mother began to scold him that just looking at the grades of the main subjects was enough to know how negligent he was, while emphasizing that senior students have no time to waste. Minjeol stood up in panic, asking his mother what she meant by mentioning the cram school, only to be questioned back by her as to what he thought she was saying and whether he still remembered her previous warning. She continued to criticize his dropping grades and demanded that he must take responsibility if he wanted to return here, despite Minjeol stammering in protest that the actual exam was not over yet. She coldly repeated the warning that if there was a problem with the midterm exam grades, she would never let things continue as they are. His mother announced that she had gone for a consultation and ordered that from tomorrow he must go to the cram school right after school, making Minjeol cry out in utter shock. The boy stammered to find an excuse that he suddenly had something busy to do in the afternoon, but was immediately ordered strictly by his father that he must listen to his mother if he wanted to stay here. Amidst the awkward atmosphere of the family meal, Minjeol could only stay silent and break a sweat as he heard his parents praise the food as delicious and promise to return here often. Returning home, he slumped exhaustion on his bed, secretly blaming his mother for using his dropping grades as an excuse just to force him to go to cram school, even though in reality, it wasn't that significant. Minjeol stared blankly at his dark phone, his heart heavy with a sense of weariness when thinking about the upcoming troubles. Suddenly, the light from the phone screen flashed in the darkness, breaking the quiet atmosphere of the room. He quickly sat straight up, fixing his eyes on the bright light emitting from the handheld device with a mixture of curiosity and suspense. Minjeol's eyes widened in surprise when he realized that an important notification had just been sent. It was a message from Arin. She sincerely apologized for falling asleep right after getting home and thoughtfully asked if he had arrived safely. The excitement made Minjeol jump off his bed, The gloomy mood from just now suddenly vanished completely. His face flushed with happiness, secretly cheering upon receiving the reply, and couldn't help but marvel at his friend's strangely cute nature. Minjeol sat hugging his knees in confusion, wanting to bring up studying together after school again, but fearing that replying too fast would make himself look really weird. Minjeol looked thoughtfully at his phone, secretly thinking that he shouldn't tell the real reason he had to go to the cram school because he feared Arin would feel bad and refuse to study together. He wondered how to explain it logically, worrying that if he only texted, the content would become too lengthy and confusing. Minjeol's eyes cast down. He stayed silent for a long time to consider how he should act properly. On the other side, Arin was sitting on her bed when she jumped in surprise to see the message notification from Minjeol suddenly pop up. Her eyes opened wide in astonishment, her face flashing with a bit of confusion, mixed with suspense at her friend's rarely proactive action. Because the phone screen clearly showed a text asking if she could speak on the phone directly right now. Minjeol nervously picked up the call, hesitantly asking if Arin was bothered right now, and felt relieved upon hearing her confirm that everything was fine. He curiously asked what she had been doing, and Arin replied that she had just woken up and intended to go back to sleep, making him anxiously ask if she was suffering from insomnia. Hearing her affirm that she slept better than anyone, Minjeol burst into a happy laugh and agreed that it was absolutely true. Finally, he gathered all his courage to bring up the study group again, but suggested moving the schedule to another time slot instead of right after school as promised. Arin questioned about the study group timing. Minjeol looked at the pile of books and then hesitantly suggested studying before class because he couldn't make it after school due to a schedule conflict at the cram school. Arin showed clear hesitation because she wasn't confident with waking up early in the morning, leaving Minjeol in a dilemma, struggling to figure out how to arrange the schedule properly. The clock already pointed to 2:40 a.m. Arin suddenly lowered her voice full of self-respect, saying that she felt really shameless to let the person who was helping her manage everything. Seeing his friend hesitate, Minjeol smiled gently to encourage her to open up, while his heart was beating rapidly, waiting for every word from the other end of the line. Minjeol's eyes brightened up completely when he heard Arin gather all her courage to reveal that actually she also had free time on weekends. The teenage boy jumped up in excitement, cheering and agreeing immediately, and didn't forget to thank Arin for understanding, even though she was the one who felt grateful for his sincerity. Falling back onto the bed with an unhideable smile, Minjeol secretly cheered as he had another great excuse to meet Arin privately on days off and promised to contact her again soon. Arin suddenly asked softly if that was the only reason he called, making Minjeol embarrassedly admit that he feared texting would make the content become too lengthy. The call ended after a gentle goodnight wish. Minjeol looked at the phone screen that had just gone dark with a sense of endless regret. Sitting blankly in the dark, he questioned himself whether he was too abrupt, while his intuition told him there was something very strange hidden in his friend's final farewell. Minjeol secretly thought that no matter what happened, being able to hear Arin's voice right now was still the most wonderful thing. He lay stretched out on the bed smiling happily, feeling that even if it was just for a moment, it was as if both of them had truly returned to the old days. On the other side, Arin was also quietly lying down looking at the glowing phone screen, her mind immersed in vague thoughts. She tossed and turned restlessly on the small bed, her sad eyes looking into the dim dark space of the room. Minjeol's request to speak on the phone directly just now kept lingering in her head, making Arin's heart unable to calm down. She reached up to ruffle her messy hair, trying to dispel the confusion and the hard-to-name emotions enveloping her soul. Arin buried her face in the pillow and sighed helplessly, telling herself that the situation was terrible since she was now completely awake and had no way to catch any sleep. The next morning, Minjeol arrived at the Songwon cram school and was immediately recognized by a female staff member who greeted him warmly. The young teacher said she had heard about him through his mother and joked that compared to Seoul, the building here was a bit small, making Minjeol only give an awkward smile in agreement. Following her along the hallway, Minjeol learned that the university prep class currently had 9 12th grade students, but very few came from Isengak High School. Minjeol obediently received a stack of exam papers from the teacher, agreeing to the requirement to finish them before 7 in the evening. After pointing out the spot for snacks for students, the teacher opened the classroom door to a warm greeting from a female student. She joyfully introduced that coincidentally, there were 2 students in the class attending Sangak High School, making Minjeol look blankly. Gina unexpectedly appeared with a stunned expression. The teacher then told the 2 to try to get along and help each other. Minjeol was still in utter shock, freezing for a few seconds before the awkward presence of his old friend. Gina's face suddenly flushed with shyness. She mumbled his name, as if unable to believe her eyes. Outside the Songwon Cram School building, the intense study atmosphere began to envelope the students. During the class, the teacher stood on the podium asking a review question about the 3 key elements that make up a story. Gina quickly listed character, event, and setting, but her mind right now was only lingering around the name and Minjeol. Looking at the figure of her friend sitting thoughtfully in front of her, she kept wondering about the reason why he was present here. Gina sat in class, her mind troubled by an absurd doubt that had just flashed through her head. She secretly wondered if Minjeol had intentionally come to the exact same cram school that she was attending. But then Gina quickly brushed the thought aside, telling herself there was no reason for him to do that, right when Minjeol softly called her name. Her friend leaned close to her ear to whisper, thoughtfully asking if she wanted to borrow his correction tape. The unexpected offer startled Gina into turning around, her face flashing with a bit of blankness, mixed with confusion. As their hands lightly brushed against each other when transferring the item, Gina mumbled a thank you in indescribable awkwardness. She tightly held the correction tape in her hand, unable to help but wonder what Minjeol was actually intending. Her eyes stared blankly at the page filled with crossed-out marks, wondering if he had been secretly watching her this whole time. The silhouette of Minjeol smiling under the rain along with his assertion of wanting to become a person worthy of Arin suddenly reappeared, making Gina's face harden, her gaze becoming deep as if she was secretly making a calculated decision. Gina was using the correction tape to cover up the words on the paper, secretly thinking that even this kindness of Minjeol was only an effort to get close to Arin because he wasn't like this back in elementary school. The elevator doors opened. Minjeol startled, and admitted to Gina that he had absolutely no idea she was also attending this cram school. Gina frowned, thinking that she was the one who was more surprised, and then questioned why he appeared here, to which Minjeol could only reply that it was because his parents had chosen this place. When the elevator reached the first floor, Gina shared that she had also only started studying since the 12th grade, so her time with it hadn't been very long. Minjeol smilingly invited her to hang out together because he thought she had few friends, making Gina angrily fire back that she still had plenty of friends, and it wasn't like what he thought. The teenage boy smiled radiantly, sincerely confessing that he had been very worried because he feared he wouldn't be able to find any truly close friend here. Looking at Minjeol's innocent smile under the streetlights, Gina suddenly froze with the self-questioning thought of whether the 2 of them were considered close now. Standing to wait for the bus at the station, Gina curiously asked a question about whether his academic performance up until now hadn't always been in the excellent group. Minjeol was surprised and asserted that he had never revealed that, but Gina said she had heard friends say that he always topped the charts from his time in Seoul until middle school. Minjeol's eyes cast down slightly. He sadly revealed that because his exam scores dropped this time, he was forced by his parents to enroll in extra classes here. Gina looked at Minjeol with utter skepticism, irritably thinking to herself whether this could really be considered a drop in scores, a feeling of frustration just welling up inside her heart. Minjeol could only look down in gloom, explaining that he had been distracted after transferring schools, and that was probably the reason his academic performance went down. Gina silently observed her friend's facial expression, her eyes becoming sharp as if trying to search for some truth hidden behind those words. She suddenly realized that the word distracted he used was actually implying Joo Arin, her legs swinging slightly in unease as she pieced everything together. Breaking the quiet atmosphere at the bus stop, Gina revealed having seen Minjeol walking home together with Arin, making her friend startle and ask back in astonishment. Gina casually confirmed and closely questioned to see if that friend's current situation was doing all right. Minjeol fell into silence, his eyes flashing with a look of sadness and anxiety when thinking about the girl he always cared about. The image of Arin's text message confessing that she also had free time on weekends suddenly appeared in his mind like a source of great motivation. Immediately, Minjeol burst into a bright, cheerful laugh, making Gina extremely surprised and confused at her friend's dizzyingly fast change of attitude. Gina stared intently at Minjeol with a highly suspicious look, clearly sensing the abnormality taking place right before her eyes. Looking at Minjeol's back, Gina secretly thought that she really hadn't expected him to change this much. She was worried because people were bad-mouthing him behind his back, but speaking it out directly made her feel extremely awkward. Breaking the silence, Minjeol softly spoke up to ask, causing Gina to suddenly turn to look at him with a highly hesitant expression. Gina unexpectedly asked a tough question, wanting to know what Minjeol would do if Joo Arin was the one to proactively confess her love to him first. The boy blushed and stammered, asking why she brought that matter up again, but Gina still resolutely pressed him to be honest with his feelings. Minjeol grew silent and bowed his head in embarrassment, after a moment of hesitation, only mumbling back that he himself didn't clearly know. The image of Arin quietly sitting alone came back, making him secretly affirm that as long as she agreed, he still yearned to be by her side. Gina's eyes suddenly became sharp and unusually serious. She emphasized that what she really wanted to say was, she put forward a horrifying hypothetical situation. What if Arin confessed that she had killed someone? Would he choose to report to the police or secretly cover up that crime? Minjeol was stunned and questioned what kind of bizarre question that was, but Gina still coldly asserted that this was a completely necessary hypothesis. Gina bluntly admitted she didn't understand why Minjeol blindly devoted his feelings to Arin like that, while emphasizing that not only her but everyone around thought so. Minjeol softly explained that Arin was currently being driven into a corner and she just needed someone to lean on, rather than it being a blind devotion like everyone assumed. Immediately, Gina interrupted harshly, arguing that exactly that matter was dangerous, because obviously a psychologically unstable person would tend to cling to anyone beside them. She continued to drill deep into how others would view this relationship in a weird way, making Minjeol stunned, and then angrily questioned back what he was supposed to do right. He choked up and asked if she wanted him to also ignore and stop caring about Arin like the other kids, causing Gina to startle and freeze before her friend's fierceness. Gina lowered her voice to explain that in her current state, having someone love and care for her like dating could inadvertently become a psychological burden to Arin. That was the reason she posed the question about reporting or covering up the crime, but Minjeol immediately countered that the hypothesis itself already defaulted to Arin being the guilty one. Gina looked straight into her friend's eyes, demandingly asking why he was the only one who dared to assert with absolute certainty about Arin's innocence like that. She emphasized the brutal reality that except for him, everyone believed Arin was the culprit, making Minjeol's heart feel suffocated because of the injustice toward the one he loved. He clenched his hands until they trembled, lowering his voice to firmly assert it was all just malicious rumors, and asked back in disappointment if Gina really believed in those things too. Gina glared and questioned Minjeol why he didn't believe the rumors, while he himself hadn't witnessed the incident that year with his own eyes either. Minjeol maintained a determined, silent expression, hitting back with a sentence that silenced his friend that Gina herself was in the exact same situation. The atmosphere at the bus stop suddenly became heavy and terrifyingly silent, as both were immersed in their own highly tense thoughts. Gina lightly bit her lip, her eyes showing clear confusion mixed with regret because her abruptness had driven the dialogue into a dilemma. Minjeol bowed his head in gloom, softly uttering an apology for accidentally making the atmosphere between the two of them suffocating. Gina hurriedly waved her hand to reassure him, admitting she had been too emotional and did not intentionally attack him with harsh words like, just now. Minjeol smirked sarcastically that he should have judged rationally like her, making Gina shiver upon realizing that he was truly furious. She broke into a cold sweat, quietly bowing her head without daring to utter another word before the terrifying coldness radiating from her friend. After a moment of silence, Minjeol unexpectedly spoke up to bring up the past with a highly serious attitude, making Gina startle. He looked straight into space, revealing the shocking information that right before that male student passed away, Arin and that person seemed to have had a highly heated argument. Gina lowered her voice to reveal the terrifying information she heard from the crowd of students at Useok Middle School. They said that was the first time in their lives they saw a normally calm Joo Arin able to scream so frantically like that. Even though no one knew the cause of the argument, the brutal truth was that the tragedy occurred less than a day right after that. Gina looked straight at Minjeol, putting forward a chilling hypothesis of whether Arin had murdered that person because she hated them too much. She emphasized that even if Arin didn't directly cause the death, she was certainly still deeply involved in this murder case. The image of a sullen Arin along with the words about crime kept repeating like that in his mind, making Minjeol feel suffocated. As the bus just arrived, Gina told him to think very carefully because both were already seniors and he needed to focus on his studies at the center. She called out a piece of advice that if he wanted to date then wait until next year, and then the bus coldly rolled away. Standing quietly amidst the night street, Minjeol couldn't dismiss the information about the heated argument between Arin and the victim from his head. He slowly walked, secretly reconfirming an important detail in his heart that the student who lost his life that year was a male student. Gina sat quietly on the late bus, her sad eyes reflecting through the glass window blurred by city streetlights. She secretly regretted her words just now, blaming herself for being too harsh when attacking Arin without basis, something she hadn't intended to say at first. Recalling the image of Minjeol tightly clenching the hem of his shirt until he trembled, he had lowered his voice to ask her whether he should just close his eyes to Arin's pain. Gina leaning her head tiredly against the window, her mind now was nothing but a mess after her close friend's violent reactions beyond expectations. Bus number 13 quietly rolled on the deserted Mountain Pass Road, carrying Gina's anxiety that perhaps she herself truly had no right to interfere in this matter. The morning sunlight of the new day began to warm the roofs, but the atmosphere seemed to still carry something a bit uneasy and mysterious. Minjeol appeared in a new outfit. He clumsily looked at the map on his phone to search for the address of an important appointment. He stopped in front of the Jenga Cafe, hidden behind remote streets, secretly wondering why this place was so isolated and hard to find to the point of making people suspicious. Suddenly, Minjeol's pupils contracted in terror, his heart beating wildly upon seeing a shocking scene unfolding right before his eyes. In that moment, Gina's highly tough question rang in his head again, questioning why he blindly trusted Arin's innocence like that. In a daze, Minjeol softly uttered a late apology, a gray memory from his childhood rushing back to trouble his mind. He stood quietly under the pale sunlight, his sad eyes looking toward the far distance, as if trying to suppress the lingering pain tormenting his heart. Striding lonely on the empty road, Minjeol told himself he shouldn't dig up the past ever again, because he thought those weren't any good memories, right when he noticed a downcast old figure walking ahead. Suddenly his gaze stopped short when seeing a wallet lying lonely right under his feet on the path filled with fallen leaves. Minjeol hurriedly called out loudly to attract attention, while urgently chasing after the person who had just dropped the item. He held the wallet high in his hand, loudly informing the other party about the important item that had just been lost. The call made a little girl startle and turn around, her eyes wide with blankness, when seeing a stranger advancing toward her. The young boy Minjeol from his childhood panted heavily after the long distance, clumsily handing the pink wallet back to his peer. Realizing the item was hers, the little girl joyfully cried out in surprise while Minjeol mumbled an explanation that she had dropped it at the crosswalk just now. Arin flashed a radiant smile and sent her sincere thanks, asking if he had picked it up from all the way back there and brought it here. That innocence made Minjeol freeze, his young heart knowing romance for the first time as his cheeks suddenly flushed with shyness. He quietly looked after Arin's figure, who was both skipping along and humming a happy melody, secretly thinking to himself that she was truly beautiful. Minjeol still stood blankly observing from behind, silently assessing that this female friend was probably also around the same age as him. On the other side, Arin was still engrossed in looking at the wallet in her hand with happy eyes, completely unaware that she had left a deep impression in his heart. Standing in the middle of the sun-drenched schoolyard of the 4th grade, the young boy wondered if the two happened to be studying together under the same school roof. Childhood memories returned with the image of Minjeol, who was a quiet boy, always withdrawn and easily lost in the noisy crowd. In that lonely world, he silently admitted to himself that he only had one friend he could truly open up to. The whole class's attention was then focused on the powerful Royal Knight card with its ability to destroy everything in its path. The boys gathered around to praise Beck-Heyman's incredible luck when he drew the ultra-rare card just this morning. Sitting quietly in a corner with a sad face, Minjeol told himself that he was just a fated child, always present but never truly cared for by anyone. Seeing this, Jinsu approached his desk and curiously asked if he had a hobby of collecting magic cards like everyone else. At Minjeol's timid denial, Jinsu looked quite regretful and clicked his tongue, saying that it was truly a huge miss. Right after that, the kind friend spread out a sparkling deck of cards and excitedly said that he had just acquired some really cool warrior cards and wanted to show them to him first. In the distance, the bustling atmosphere still surrounded Haemin's group as that knight card continued to be the center of all admiration. Minjeol looked at the cards in Jinsu's hands with a distant gaze, silently feeling the sincere care from the only friend who was always by his side. Under the quiet school roof, anyone could easily tell how much Jinsu longed for recognition from the boss, Haemin. Walking blankly down the hallway, Minjeol continuously heard gasps of awe praising Haemin's luck for possessing a new treasure. The smug Haemin held the rare card high and bragged to his lackeys that he had accidentally picked it up at the playground yesterday. Looking at the sparkling Iron Warrior card, the surrounding students could only marvel and regret not going to the playground earlier to seek a miracle. Minjeol stood watching from afar and suddenly called out Jinsu's name, causing his friend, who was sitting quietly in the classroom, to startle and turn around to respond. He anxiously approached and pressed Jinsu about the whereabouts of the special card that this friend had promised to show him yesterday, asking if it had been lost. Immediately, Jinsu jumped in panic, his face turning pale and sweat starting to pour down when facing his friend's questioning. He continuously waved his hands to deny Minjeol's concern, then awkwardly justified that he had already given that precious card to another friend. Minjeol went silent in shock. The image of the Iron Warrior card in Haemin's hand earlier returned, making his mind tangled with suspicion. Just then, Haemin suddenly rushed over and intimately threw his arm around Jinsu's shoulder, leaving Minjeol standing there stunned as he gradually realized the bitter truth behind the lie. Haemin gleefully put his arm around Jinsu and dragged him away to eat, leaving Minjeol standing there with a very forced goodbye. The boy stood quietly watching the backs of his two friends, an indescribable feeling of being left out surging in his heart. The image of the Iron Warrior card that Haemin had just bragged about kept haunting Minjeol's mind, arousing endless doubts. He was certain it belonged to Jinsu, because the scratch on the face of the card perfectly matched his memory. Standing in front of the quiet school, Minjeol silently wondered about the strange disappearance of the treasure from his best friend's hands. Unable to ignore it, he blocked Haemin's way and demanded that he explain clearly before the school bell rang. Minjeol bluntly pressed Haemin on where he had actually gotten that Iron Warrior card. He clearly showed a look of embarrassment, but stubbornly insisted that he had only stumbled upon it at the playground yesterday. Haemin started to lose patience. He glared, closed in, and threatened, asking if Minjeol was trying to accuse him. Despite the pressure, Minjeol still tried to explain the coincidence of the scratch and Jinsu's clumsy lie earlier. Haemin's rough hand suddenly grabbed Minjeol tightly by the collar, leaving the boy unable to react. He glared threateningly and scolded Minjeol for being a lowly loser who dared to suspect a boss like him. The whole hallway buzzed at the sight of Haemin declaring he wouldn't let any kid who dared to make him lose face off the hook. Looking at the opponent's panicked face and rapid breathing, the tyrant became even more smug as he asked if he wanted a taste of death. In the midst of peak tension, Arin suddenly appeared and shouted loudly, demanding that Haemin stop his rude behavior immediately. She stood up to protect her friend and loudly questioned what Haemin was doing, making him just resentfully curse and let go. Before leaving, the boss didn't forget to leave a bitter warning that if he ever caught Minjeol one more time, he would pay with his life. Facing Arin's anxious concern, Minjeol could only bow his head in shame and mumble that he was still fine. Even though Arin desperately wanted to take him to the infirmary for a checkup, the boy stubbornly refused and stared blankly at the back of the one who had just humiliated him. Sitting quietly in the classroom, Minjeol silently resolved to find every way to get the treasure card back for Jinsu to erase this injustice. Haemin hastily gathered his belongings and left immediately upon hearing his group of friends calling to play soccer outside the hallway. In a hidden corner nearby, Minjeol quietly observed every movement of the boss with eyes full of caution and anxiety. As soon as the locker was left open, the stacks of papers and belongings inside suddenly tumbled to the ground while Haemin's laughter gradually faded away. Amidst that mess, the sparkling Iron Warrior card suddenly appeared like solid evidence of the deceitfulness of the guy who had just left. Silently telling himself that he was the only one who could return the treasure to Jinsu, the boy quickly picked up the card and hid it deep inside his backpack. The feeling of tension made Minjeol's heart beat continuously as if it wanted to burst out of his chest when he walked away with a sweat-drenched face. He immediately ran toward the classroom, repeatedly calling Jinsu's name in hopes of handing back the precious card right away. However, the empty room made Minjeol disappointed to realize his friend had already gone home, so he told himself that waiting a little longer would be fine. Watching the school gradually sink into the sunset, he resolved to keep the card very carefully to hand it directly to Jinsu the next morning. When dawn just broke, Minjeol carried a heart full of suspense into the classroom and began searching for the silhouette of his best friend. Heyman sobbed and hid behind his arm in the middle of the classroom, turning the stolen card incident into a shocking and pressure-filled event. His fake sniffling was like knives cutting into Minjeol's heart, who was silently enduring extreme fear. The teacher stood at the podium with a stern face, demanding that all students sit in their seats and close their eyes tightly. The teacher announced that Heyman's most precious card had vanished into thin air, while directing a cold, sharp gaze toward Minjeol. He emphasized that stealing is an unforgivable act and threatened that there would be appropriate punishment for the culprit. The ironclad command rang out, forcing everyone to put their backpacks on their desks and their hands on their heads, as the teacher asserted he would personally search each one. He warned the person hiding the item in their backpack to brace themselves for the most terrible consequences if caught red-handed. Suddenly, the teacher stopped right in front of Minjeol's desk, sternly questioning why he still hadn't put his hands on his head. Sweat pouring down his pale face, Minjeol froze upon hearing the teacher declare that the search would begin with his very own backpack. And then the last shred of hope vanished as the Iron Warrior card was pulled out of his backpack by the teacher, right before the shock of the entire class. The teacher held up the card he had just found in the backpack and strictly asked how he intended to explain this item. Minjeol, drenched in sweat, stammered to affirm that he didn't steal it but was only trying to carry out a different intention. He thought to himself that the card originally belonged to Jinsu, and he only wanted to get it back to return it to his best friend. The teacher immediately turned to Jinsu to verify whether Minjeol's excuse was the truth or not. The best friend with a bandage on his face clearly showed awkwardness, sweat running down when facing the pressure from the teacher. Minjeol's heart felt like it was squeezing when he heard Jinsu coldly utter a denial of all his help. He even added a fatal stab by saying that he had gifted the card to Heyman and accused Minjeol of wanting to take it for himself. The disappointed teacher ordered Minjeol to stay behind for punishment, officially beginning a dark streak of days being bullied. The hatred exploded as textbooks were violently and contemptuously thrown onto his desk by the students. Heyman smiled smugly, holding Minjeol's textbook high, and challenged him to try and come get it back if he was brave enough. Heyman triumphantly held the book up and broadcasted to the whole class that Minjeol was back to his old ways of stealing again. The crowd of students chimed in with mocking laughter, sarcastically saying that this thief needed to be taught a proper lesson. Seizing the moment, Heyman shouted a command for Jinsu to quickly throw that textbook toward him immediately. He continued to cheer with excitement, reminding his accomplices to coordinate perfectly to ensure that Minjeol had no chance of touching the item. Standing before his only best friend, Minjeol desperately pleaded with Jinsu to have mercy and return his book to him. The only response to that plea was an avoiding gaze and a face drenched in guilty sweat from someone under pressure from the surrounding crowd. Finally, Jinsu decisively swung his arm and threw the book far away, leaving Minjeol rooted to the spot watching his belonging fly into the air. Heyman spared no words of praise for Jinsu's action as he ruthlessly tossed the item away like nothing more than a pile of garbage. As the silhouettes of those two gradually faded into the distance, Jinsu only dared to mutter a belated apology before hurriedly turning around and running away. Looking at the book lying isolated in a dirty puddle, Minjeol bitterly realized that now there was absolutely no one left on his side in this life. Minjeol stood isolated in the middle of the schoolyard, telling himself that he had now truly been abandoned and turned away by the whole world. He painfully realized that Jinsu, just to win favor with the boss, was willing to dump all the blame on him, leaving him with no chance to clear his name. The humiliation peaked when a female student in the class raised her hand to ask the teacher to change her seat, fearing that she would have her things stolen by a known thief like Minjeol. Amidst a contemptuous silence, the teacher spoke up to ask if anyone would volunteer to swap seats with Sumin. Immediately, Arin quietly put on her backpack and stepped forward while the teacher asked the two to start swapping places with each other. The little girl gave a radiant smile and proactively greeted Minjeol, shattering the layer of cold ice enveloping his soul. Responding to her greeting awkwardly, Minjeol was stunned when he heard the teacher ask the whole class to open their textbooks to page 83. Realizing Minjeol didn't have a book, Arin leaned over and gently offered if he wanted to share her textbook. Minjeol asked in astonishment if she was really okay with doing so, only to receive a resolute nod and Arin's agreement. Looking deep into those clear eyes, the boy tremblingly asked if she wasn't afraid that an outcast like him would take something precious from her. Arin tilted her head, looking at Minjeol with a confused gaze, then softly asked why she should worry about those baseless rumors. She gently reiterated her belief that Minjeol was only trying to return the card to Jinsu and had no other malicious intentions. Looking down at the textbook, Minjeol tremblingly asked if Arin truly trusted him and received a firm affirmation from her. The boy spaced out in shock, his eyes wide open as he stammered to ask the reason why she was so willing to stand by his side like that. Arin smiled a mysterious little smile, her gaze distant as if flipping through old memory pages to find an answer for him. She slowly began to explain the reason that made her always maintain an ironclad belief in the friend sitting next to her. Memories returned with the image of little Arin back, then looking deep into his eyes and affirming that he was definitely not that kind of bad person. Those words were like a blinding beam of light shining straight into his shattered soul, making the boy Minjeol completely stunned with emotion. It was that fateful sentence that pulled him out of the deep pit of despair, lighting up the dark path he had to walk alone. Returning to the present, Minjeol smiled brightly, thanking Arin for the cup of coffee, and silently cherished this rare peaceful moment beside the girl he loved. Arin appeared with a baseball cap obscuring her gaze. She embarrassedly confessed that she was actually the one who should be thankful for taking up her friend's entire weekend afternoon. Responding to that hesitation, Minjeol excitedly laid out a stack of review materials and suggested they both should start with math, despite confessing that he himself was also very confused about where to begin. The boy could not hide his confidence when introducing a comprehensive study plan from reviewing basic 10th grade knowledge to practicing skill-based exam questions, which left Arin thoroughly surprised. Arin began testing Minjeol's foundation with a question about functions, and she gently nodded in satisfaction upon seeing that the opponent still remembered pieces of old knowledge. The iced coffee cup gradually melted on the table, marking a peaceful beginning for the private group study session of the two friends after many years apart. Lines of text began filling the blank sheets of paper under the diligent pen, proving the effort to change and reconnect the bond that had once been broken. While Arin was absorbed in solving exercises, Minjeol occasionally rested his chin on his hand to admire her focused look with a special care. He gently bit his pen thoughtfully, tracking the study progress while silently observing the expressions of the girl sitting across from him. 30 minutes passed in absolute silence, as both were immersed in the world of knowledge and temporarily forgot about the existing pains. Minjeol directed his distant gaze toward Arin, silently wondering how she was feeling when having to face dry numbers after a long period of neglect. Arin quietly sat writing underneath the brim of her hat, the space around her seeming completely detached from everything. Minjeol intently observed his friend, indescribable emotions welling up inside him as he saw her still diligent with each page of the book. Arin looked up, her messy hair covering part of her face, but unable to hide the pensive look on that beautiful face. Minjeol could not contain his inner voice and softly called Arin's name, the sound seemingly melting into the quiet air of the study session. Arin was startled to realize the other's presence. She looked at him full of wonder and asked if he had just intended to say something. Minjeol's face flushed slightly with embarrassment. He immediately waved his hands to explain that he was just so caught up in looking at her that he spaced out completely. To cover up the embarrassment, Minjeol quickly pushed the book toward Arin and asked her to help look at a difficult question. She gently received the book, her eyes narrowing as she intently read the problem with an alluring absorption. Minjeol silently followed Arin's analysis. he remarked that this question was truly tricky and required mastering a lot of knowledge at the same time. When leaning down to look at Erin's notebook, he suddenly smiled upon seeing the cute kitten drawings scribbled on the margin of the page. Erin silently sketched the graph and began reviewing basic calculus concepts under the encouraging observation of the friend sitting opposite. Under the brim of the baseball cap, Erin softly replied briefly and then continued to immerse herself in the world of dry numbers. Witnessing that action, Minjeol suddenly paused, a great doubt rising in his heart about his friend's strange change. From the secluded coffee shop to avoiding school, he painfully realized that Erin was trying to use every way to become invisible to the eyes of the world. Realizing the less-than-friendly glares, Erin gently adjusted the brim of her hat lower to hide her tired face. Looking at that focused appearance, Minjeol suddenly spaced out, his heart skipping a beat as old figures unexpectedly rushed back to occupy his mind. He was shocked to piece everything together, from choosing a secluded shop to her disappearance at lunchtime or Erin's dense frequency of skipping school. Looking at the small figure of the girl diligently taking notes, Minjeol sorrowfully wondered if Erin was trying by all means to become invisible to the world. From the secluded coffee shop to avoiding school, he painfully realized that Erin was trying to use every way to become invisible to the world's sight. The study session ended on the poetic stone bridge. Erin expressed her gratitude for finding the solution, while Minjeol affirmed that her talent always shone just as it did in the beginning. Minjeol flashed a radiant smile as he walked with Erin under the green canopies, his laughter seemingly wanting to dispel the long-standing silence. When passing by a bustling food truck, he thoughtfully asked Erin if she wanted to eat some spicy rice cakes that were still piping hot. Erin froze, her eyes clearly showing bewilderment and anxiety upon seeing the crowd gathering happily by the stall. She hurriedly shook her head in refusal and reached up to pull the brim of her hat down to avoid stares, causing Minjeol to anxiously press if she was really okay. The atmosphere suddenly became so awkward that Erin felt like she wanted to dissolve instantly to escape the attention of everyone around. Despite her face flushing with confusion, she asserted she was still fine and would eat after returning home, leaving Minjeol able only to stand and watch with concern. Looking at the small back hurriedly leaving, Minjeol bitterly realized that Erin seemed to fear crowded places more than he thought. His eyes suddenly became pensive as thoughts about the isolation Erin was enduring began to invade his mind. Memories returned with the image of Gina angrily questioning whether Minjeol had ever thought about the judging eyes of the public when seeing the two of them walking together. The bitter warning of the old friend rang out like a splash of cold water, asserting that getting close to Erin at this time would only bring disaster. Minjeol fell silent, contemplating the truth that was gradually revealing itself through the sad eyes of the girl standing in front of him. He silently wondered if Erin was intentionally keeping her distance from the crowd because she was afraid they would unleash their anger onto him. Erin gently turned her head to remind the other that there was no need to be so cautious, leaving Minjeol able only to blankly ask back with a highly confused look. Suddenly, memory clips rushed back with the image of a boy laughing radiantly on a swing in the middle of a playground full of summer sun. He blankly called Erin's name as he saw the silhouette of the little girl from years ago gently pushing the swing for him on a distant sunset afternoon. Returning to reality, Minjeol unexpectedly spoke up to invite Erin to try sitting on the swing once again, which caught the girl completely by surprise. Under the brim of her hat, Erin's face suddenly flushed pink. She maintained absolute silence, making the surrounding atmosphere incredibly strange. Minjeol told himself that the silence was an implicit agreement because he felt that Erin truly wanted to experience that feeling again. His gaze suddenly became deep and filled with empathy, as if silently promising to become the sturdiest support for this poor girl. Minjeol gently stepped closer and offered to push the swing for her, while encouraging Erin to bravely try opening her heart once more. Erin anxiously looked around and then hesitantly reminded him of the presence of the people around them, but Minjeol quickly reassured her not to mind them. He looked at her with affectionate eyes and firmly asserted that no one would bother to notice or judge the actions of the two of them right now. Erin's eyes widened slightly in surprise, as if the other's sincerity was beginning to move her soul, which had been closed off for a long time. Minjeol slowly reached out to grab the swing ropes, preparing to fulfill his promise of bringing a little joy to the girl he loved. He bent down slightly to push the swing forward and thoughtfully asked if this speed was enough to make her comfortable, receiving a very soft reply of agreement. The swing began to soar into the air, tearing through the quiet atmosphere and carrying away the anxieties weighing heavily on her small shoulders. Midst the roaring wind blowing through her hair, Arin gently closed her eyes to enjoy a rare sense of freedom and silently exclaimed that the wind today was truly wonderful. The swing's rhythm got higher and higher, creating soft curves in the deserted playground, where only two souls were gradually drawing closer to each other. She hurriedly reached up to hold the brim of her hat tightly so it wouldn't be blown away by the wind, while trying to hide the mixed emotions welling up in her heart. Minjeol became even more enthusiastic. He flashed a radiant smile and announced he would push a bit harder, not forgetting to tell Arin to hold on tight to the ropes. The swing began to move powerfully, tearing through the quiet atmosphere of the playground at dusk. Her gaze wavered slightly as she looked deep into the sincere face of her old friend, making all psychological barriers seem to begin to dissolve. Arin looked up at the immensely high sky with emotional eyes, silently enjoying the absolute freedom that she had long yearned for. She hurriedly tightened her grip on the iron chains to keep her balance, feeling the intense vibrations spreading from the palm of her hand to her very core. In midair, the baseball cap suddenly slipped off her head and soared with the wind, leaving a soul completely absorbed in finding a piece of happy memory. Realizing he had accidentally pushed too hard, Minjeol frantically reached out intending to stop the swing, but everything was already out of control. Realizing he had accidentally pushed too hard, Minjeol frantically reached out intending to stop the swing, but everything was already out of control. The thudding sound of impact on the ground startled Minjeol, his face changing color as he instinctively sensed an accident had just occurred. Arin tumbled to the ground and cringed in pain, leaving Minjeol able only to scream her name in extreme regret and anxiety. He hurriedly helped Arin sit down on a stone ledge and thoughtfully asked if she could stand steadily, receiving a soft groan about a sharp pain in her ankle. Minjeol repeatedly apologized to Arin for getting too excited and accidentally pushing the swing so hard that it caused her injury, while the girl still tried to assert she was fine. Looking at the other's extremely worried appearance, Arin smiled gently to reassure him and asserted that she was truly fine to dispel the tense atmosphere. Minjeol's eyes suddenly widened as he caught the rare smile of his friend, a peaceful moment that he had been looking forward to for a very long time. He was shocked to realize that since they reunited, this was the first time he saw Arin reveal such a warm and genuine emotion. Minjeol's gaze softened. He silently blamed himself for how he could smile happily while he was the one who had caused her pain. To make amends, he immediately stood up and announced he would go find the nearest pharmacy to buy medicine as well as some water for her. Minjeol told Arin to just sit still and rest, promising that he would return immediately, which left the little girl spaced out. He hurriedly turned his back to leave, but still didn't forget to reiterate his promise to return soon, despite Arin's highly dependent gaze following his back. Suddenly, a small, trembling hand reached out and tightly grabbed the hem of Minjeol's shirt, as if wanting to hold onto the only ray of hope in her life. Arin desperately spoke up to ask if the two of them could just stay beside each other like this, because she didn't want to face loneliness for even one more moment. Arin looked up at Minjeol with an imploring gaze. The little girl softly pleaded with him to stay by her side, instead of going to find a pharmacy. Faced with his friend's unexpected weakness, Minjeol blushed slightly and stood frozen in confusion, mixed with a surging sense of sorrow. Both sat quietly under the green canopy, each with their own thoughts, making the surrounding space suddenly become strangely silent. Arin tried to pick herself up and asserted she could still walk, causing Minjeol to anxiously follow her every small movement. The little girl playfully turned around to prove she was fine with brisk steps, but Minjeol still didn't stop doubting her injury. All of a sudden, Arin dashed forward, leaving Minjeol standing blankly watching her silhouette gradually fade away into the evening sun. But then she collapsed with a painful groan, causing Minjeol to rush over in a panic and scold her for why she wouldn't listen to him and rest. Looking at the sky gradually turning dark, Minjeol pensively thought that Aaron must be very hungry after an afternoon full of incidents. He stood blankly observing Aaron's lonely figure from behind, his mind tangled as he didn't know what to do to help her escape from hunger. Gently touching his forehead with exhaustion, Minjeol felt helpless before the ironic situation of both of them right now. Minjeol softly called Aaron's name when he saw she was still sitting blankly on the ground, a feeling of sorrow surging inside him after the recent incident. He decided to bend down low and suggested that Aaron quickly climb onto his back so he could carry her out of here. Aaron looked up with eyes heavy with melancholy, softly reminding him that the time right now was already too late. Responding to that hesitation, Minjeol firmly asserted that he would bring her safely all the way home before the darkness completely enveloped them. The fifth-grade classroom suddenly became abuzz when curious friends asked Aaron about her long-desired ideal type. Hearing that question, the boy Minjeol was startled, his face briefly flashing a look of extreme anxiety and confusion. He diligently cleaned the windows while holding his breath, eavesdropping on the group of friends urging Aaron not to delay and quickly reveal the secret. Minjeol's hands paused in tension as the friends switched to interrogating whether there was someone in the school she truly liked. While Aaron looked into the distance to consider, Minjeol's heart began to beat rapidly with nervousness and anticipation. Aaron's radiant smile and her affirmation that she didn't like anyone left Minjeol secretly feeling full of disappointment. The group of friends continued to criticize the standard of a kind person as too vague and pressed her on whether she cared about physical appearance. Aaron suddenly paused as if she just realized something important, then excitedly cheered when she found the answer. Minjeol widened his eyes in amazement, silently watching every tiny expression on his friend's face. Aaron clasped her hands earnestly and daydreamed about a strong, reliable person who would be ready to step up and protect her whenever she was in danger. Minjeol looked at his own skinny arms, his heart full of an inferiority complex about his long-standing weakness. He stood before the mirror, silently observing his small frame and wondering how to become as strong as the ideal type Aaron expected. Determined to change, he put all his effort into doing his first push-ups, but his body quickly trembled and collapsed from exhaustion. Sprawled on the bed in despair, Minjeol bitterly told himself that he was truly doomed because he was too weak. The anxiety weighed even heavier when he realized he had no advantage in height at all, right as the school intercom asked the whole class to start the group exercise. His partner turned around to look at him with a defiant gaze, making Minjeol just grit his teeth and endure his inferiority. In the middle of the bustling schoolyard, couples started performing the exercise of lifting their partners high up. Suddenly Minjeol was lifted into the air, struggling in a panic as he abruptly lost the foothold beneath his feet. The other boy lifted Minjeol up while laughing in delight, mocking that he was as light as air. Minjeol could only bewilderedly beg the other guy to quickly put him down amidst the malicious teasing of the friends around him. The teacher blew the whistle, sternly reminding the whole class to stop messing around, while Minjeol secretly envied Baekhyun's superior strength. He gritted his teeth, enduring the humiliation of having to witness someone else showing off their strength right in front of Aaron, the girl he cherished the most. In the late afternoon, the cool stream of water quietly seeped into the roots of the rubber tree in a quiet corner of the schoolyard. Minjeol held the watering can alone, reassuring himself that embarrassing himself in front of her was nothing new, when he suddenly froze at the sound of a call. Aaron unexpectedly appeared from behind and curiously asked if it was true he still hadn't prepared to go home at this hour. Minjeol blushed and awkwardly explained that today he had the duty of watering the plants, which made Aaron a bit surprised. She stepped closer, leaning her face in to curiously observe the actions of her friend who was trying to hide his embarrassment. Seeing Minjeol sweating profusely and looking tense, Aaron anxiously asked if something was wrong with him. He hesitantly asked if Aaron wanted to try experiencing this job, and she immediately cheered with excitement at getting to share the task with him. To dispel the awkward atmosphere, Minjeol quietly continued the work of caring for the green potted plants. Aaron held her breath, asking if she was doing it right, and received sincere praise from Minjeol. Seeing Aaron worried that she was getting in the way of the work, Minjeol hurriedly reassured her that she was helping him a lot. Suddenly Aaron moved closer and softly whispered that Minjeol was actually much stronger than his appearance suggested. That compliment made him blush furiously, while she continued to marvel at how he lifted the heavy potted plants in such a masculine way. Excited by her friend's strength, Arin came up with the idea of redoing the morning exercise with him. She excitedly suggested that Minjeol try lifting her up just like the other couples had done. Despite Minjeol's immense hesitation, Arin firmly insisted that he wouldn't need to apologize even if she accidentally fell to the ground. Their hands intertwined tightly with determination. Minjeol held his breath and asked if she was truly ready for this challenge. With a face flushed red from embarrassment and nervousness, he began to use all his strength to lift Arin high up. Minjeol loudly counted the beat and lifted Arin into the air, making her exclaim in amazement at his unexpected strength. The events that unfolded afterward gradually blurred in his mind, but there was still one memory he always remembered as clear as day. It was the warm feeling radiating from Arin's back when he volunteered to give her a piggyback ride, walking under the dim streetlights. In the quiet space, Arin softly called Minjeol's name, making him gently turn his head to listen to his friend's confidences. She timidly asked if she was too heavy, but Minjeol immediately denied it and reminded her that she needed to pay attention to eating more. He anxiously observed Arin's thin shirt and thoughtfully asked if she was feeling cold from the night breezes. Arin avoided his gaze and softly replied that she was fine, not forgetting to ask about his condition in return. Arin's hands squeezed Minjeol's shoulders tightly while he silently affirmed that he didn't feel cold at all either. The stream of memories suddenly rolled back to 5 minutes prior, when the atmosphere between the two was still full of awkwardness. Minjeol quietly knelt down and firmly requested Arin to climb onto his back, so he could take her home after her painful fall. That highly masculine proposal left Arin stunned, her eyes widening in amazement at her friend's protection and care. Arin tried to force herself up, affirming that she was still fine and could walk by herself without needing help. She limped along, worried that they had wasted too much time, and if they continued, they would miss the last bus. Standing behind and observing her back, Minjeol gently called Arin's name, making her stop and turn her head to look at him questioningly. He hesitantly asked if the real reason she absolutely refused to let him carry her on his back was it because she feared the judgmental stares of people around them would be drawn toward the two of them. Arin was momentarily flustered and then looked away, softly replying that the situation wasn't exactly what he was thinking. Her face clearly showed a look of melancholy along with hidden sorrows that were hard to put into words when facing Minjeol's care. He expressed his fear that if other students caught them walking together, it would only bring more trouble to her life. Minjeol's gaze became more resolute than ever, secretly resolving not to let the painful past repeat itself once again. He suddenly asked Arin to stand still for a moment, leaving her to just stare blankly at her friend's every move. Minjeol unexpectedly lifted Arin up, causing her to exclaim in panic as she hadn't mentally prepared for such an abrupt action. He happily carried her on his back and reassured her that she was actually light as a feather, not heavy at all like what she always feared. Minjeol firmly asserted that if the only reason she hesitated was the fear of others staring, then he had even more reason to protect her. He walked in silence and expressed that he didn't care at all about the gossiping behind his back, nor did he feel the slightest bit tired. With a broad and sturdy back, Minjeol secretly determined to let the whole world see how proud he was to walk with her so openly like this. Arin gently rested her head on his shoulder and said that he didn't need to go to such lengths, but still didn't forget to send a deeply moving thank you. In a shy moment, Arin suggested she hold on tighter because Minjeol's height made her feel a bit dizzy being so high up. Just as the atmosphere was getting warm, a roaring engine sounded, startling both of them into turning back to look at the deserted road. The bus coldly glided by and disappeared behind the distant mountains, leaving Minjeol panicked, wondering if that was the last bus. He held his breath to check the app on his phone, then bitterly confirmed that their last hope had vanished, leaving them both alone in the night. The two sat down to discuss their direction as Minjeol worriedly asked if Arin's house was truly too far to walk back to. Looking at the desolate road ahead, he pensively realized he had no other choice since all transportation had stopped operating. Minjeol reconfirmed Arin's home address, then firmly demanded she climb onto his back so he could carry her home because her legs were injured. Even as Arin tried to resist to walk on her own, he sternly warned her about the dangers of this dark stretch of road without a single street lamp. Arin lowered her head with a sense of guilt, secretly thinking she couldn't let Minjeol suffer for a whole hour and fearing he would get hurt because of her. Minjeol looked at her with resolute eyes, blaming himself for being the one who caused her pain, thus having the responsibility to take care of her until the end. Suddenly, he reached out and tightly grasped Aaron's small hand as a solid promise amidst the night. Noticing his friend's hesitation, Minjeol softened his voice and proposed an alternative way for the two of them to move forward together. He suggested Aaron hold his hand and told her to hold on very tight as an anchor just in case he misstepped on the road. That intimate gesture made Minjeol's face flush deep red from shyness, his heart beating wildly as he felt the warmth from her hand intertwining tightly with his. After a moment of deliberation, Aaron finally spoke up softly, agreeing to let Minjeol lead her down the lonely road. Under the dim moonlight, the sound of their footsteps crunched on the asphalt road, blending with the throbbing beats of their hearts. The two quietly intertwined their hands tightly, stepping forward together through the space enveloped by the darkness of the roadside forest trees. Minjeol's face suddenly flushed bright red from shyness upon realizing the exceedingly intimate closeness with the girl he had secretly loved for so long. Their hands gripped each other tightly, the warm feeling from the other's palm acting like a soothing medicine for their turbulent souls. Minjeol looked up at the night sky and internally marveled at how incredibly dark the surrounding area was. The deserted road had no sign of a single passing vehicle, creating a stillness so profound that their footsteps echoed all along the path. He swallowed nervously upon realizing his hands were sweating profusely, terrified that his friend would notice his awkwardness. Aaron softly spoke up to dispel the suffocating atmosphere, confessing that this was the first time she had actually set foot on the road she had previously only seen through the glass window. Minjeol nostalgically recalled the memory of the bus ride from years ago and smiled when Aaron clearly remembered how he used to get off exactly 3 stops after her. Minjeol curiously asked if they had started getting close since their middle school years. Aaron gently shook her head, saying that they had actually been attached since elementary school, and asked back if he also considered that as being close. Minjeol awkwardly waved his hands to explain, because previously he always secretly thought he was the only one who unilaterally felt that closeness. Aaron's face turned slightly pink as she admitted she started having special realizations about this relationship around middle school. Suddenly, Aaron misstepped, making her stumble and almost fall. She hurriedly corrected herself, saying she had misspoken and expressed her previous thought wrong. Minjeol quickly grabbed hold of Aaron and worriedly checked on her condition while she tried to reassure him that she was fine and didn't dislocate anything. Looking down at the rough, rocky road surface, he realized this path hadn't been maintained at all and reminded both of them to be extremely careful. Minjeol hurriedly turned on his phone's flashlight to illuminate the way, but Aaron stopped him out of fear that the device would quickly run out of battery in the middle of the dark night. He firmly insisted that it didn't matter even if his phone died, then hesitated, intending to say something deeper and more profound. Aaron softly squeezed Minjeol's hand tighter and gently confessed that she actually preferred the feeling of walking hand in hand with him like this. Minjeol froze, his eyes widening in astonishment and his face blushing deeply at Aaron's affectionate confession. He hurriedly walked ahead to hide his embarrassment, muttering an explanation that his eyes had gradually adjusted to the dark, so they needed to save phone battery. Suddenly, Minjeol misstepped and stumbled, causing Aaron to gasp in panic and anxiously ask if he was okay. To regain his composure, Minjeol suggested they both stop and rest for a moment on a large rock by the roadside before continuing their journey. While their hands were still lingeringly touching each other, Aaron suddenly exclaimed in awe as she looked up at the space above. A brilliant sky full of sparkling stars appeared, like an unexpected gift for two souls drawing closer together in the middle of the night. Aaron curiously asked if his time living in glamorous Seoul had allowed him to witness this beautiful sight, only to receive a shake of the head from Minjeol. She pensively looked down at their hands and softly contemplated that the darker the sky, the more brilliantly the stars would shine. Looking into Aaron's sad eyes, Minjeol boldly asked about her actual life at her old school Useok, which was full of rumors and scandals. Aaron sighed distantly, subtly reproaching him that it took several weeks after their reunion following 5 years of separation for him to muster the courage to ask her that. Minjeol scratched his head and embarrassedly apologized for his excessive curiosity, but Aaron just gently reassured him that everything was fine. Aaron lowered her face in thought, softly confiding that she actually had some incredibly wonderful times there. Looking up at the sparkling starry sky, she nostalgically recalled the kind new friends and the countless exciting experiences she had gone through. Minjeol listened quietly, an indescribable emotion suddenly welling up in his heart as he saw his friend's lonely back. He looked up at the vast sky with a contented smile, affirming that his biggest goal was to get into college with her. Arin was stunned by his confession that the thought of a future encounter was what he looked forward to most in his life. In the quietness of the dark night, Minjeol sincerely expressed his overwhelming happiness at finally being able to be by her side like this. Arin silently turned her back to him, her shoulders trembling slightly, as if she were trying to suppress the intense waves of emotion inside her. She looked up at the distant Milky Way and softly exclaimed that this reality brought about an incredibly strange and unbelievable feeling. Arin helplessly bowed her head, choking up as she asked why, after everything, Minjeol could still be so forgiving and treat her this well. Arin's question suddenly awakened the deepest, most hidden sentiment that had been smoldering in Minjeol's mind. That was exactly what he had always yearned to ask his close friend throughout all those long years. The image of the little girl Arin from the past, with her angelic smile and warm tolerance, suddenly rushed back vividly in his memory. He secretly thought that perhaps Arin's reason and his own true feelings were never alike at all. Their hands lightly touched on the rock like an invisible bridge connecting two throbbing hearts. In Minjeol's mind, there was only one answer left now, and he decided not to keep running away anymore. Amidst the quiet space, he gathered all his courage to confess that he really liked her, causing the atmosphere to freeze in an instant. Arin froze, her eyes widening in sheer amazement and her face blushing deeply from this overwhelmingly sweet emotional shock. Minjeol was also startled and shocked, his breathing becoming heavy as he realized the abruptness of his own words. He panicked and stepped back, questioning himself in extreme fear that he had just officially confessed his feelings to her. Sweat beaded on Minjeol's face, as Arin's question suddenly sparked a long-held desire for an answer. Looking quietly at Arin's back, he inwardly realized this was the very question he had always intended to ask her his whole life. The image of a young Arin with a radiant smile suddenly flashed back, making him wonder why she had chosen to treat him so well that day. Minjeol quietly turned away, secretly thinking that perhaps her reason from the past and his present feelings were fundamentally, completely different. Their hands lightly touched, and he bitterly realized the profound difference in both of their emotions at this moment. He gathered all his courage to speak up, because deep down there was only a single answer surging fiercely now. In the silent space, Minjeol officially confessed that he really liked her, causing the atmosphere to instantly freeze. Arin froze, her eyes widening in astonishment and her face blushing brightly from this incredibly sweet emotional shock. Minjeol was also terrified, sweat dripping down as he realized he had just slipped up and blurted out his hidden secret. Arin silently bowed her head, letting her hair cover her face, and timidly asked the reason why he could have feelings for her. Arin slightly turned back in wonder, softly asking why Minjeol had suddenly let go of their tightly held hands. Minjeol blushed and lowered his head in utter embarrassment, softly admitting that the reason was because his hands were sweating too much from nervousness. Arin smiled gently, taking the initiative to reach out her hand and playfully suggesting he try touching it to see that hers was also soaking wet. Their hands once again found each other, the spreading warmth making their recent embarrassment instantly vanish into the night. Arin gently squeezed Minjeol's fingers and affirmed that she herself was sweating just as much as he was. She looked straight into her friend's eyes with a flushed face, softly whispering that what he had just feared was entirely true. Amidst the quiet space, Arin gently felt and praised the incredibly comforting warmth radiating from Minjeol's hand. But then she suddenly noticed his hand becoming cold and asked with concern, making Minjeol shyly admit that he was shivering a bit. He hastily started to take off his outer shirt to give it to her, but Arin immediately voiced her refusal of that gesture of care. Arin lowered her face to let her hair hide her gaze, softly confiding that what she truly desired right now was more than just a warm shirt. Arin lowered her face in deep shyness, her hands tightly intertwined with Minjeol's as she softly confessed that if they just stayed closely together like this, then the warmth from each other would help them dispel the freezing cold of the dark night. That affirmation left Minjeol completely frozen because it was so overwhelmingly sweet. Under the silent night, the desolate trail winding through the thicket of trees seemed to pave the way for a fateful encounter. Minjeol felt his heart racing as their hands intertwined tightly, the nervousness causing sweat to subtly bead on his fingers. The boy looked away in embarrassment with a flushed face, silently wondering what the welling emotions in his chest truly meant at this moment. Amidst the dark forest, Arin nestled close to Minjeol and rested her head on his shoulder with full trust, creating a deeply intimate scene. Minjeol panicked upon realizing his palms were drenched in sweat and clumsily confessed his worry that it would make her uncomfortable. Contrary to his anxiety, Arin looked up slightly and gently affirmed that his hands gave her a wonderfully warm feeling. He hesitantly asked if he truly deserved to be this close to her, only to receive her caring reply that she was just afraid he was cold. Arin's eyes suddenly grew profound as she looked straight at Minjeol and hesitantly said there was something she really wanted to express. In the suffocating atmosphere of their closeness, a sweating and tense Minjeol stuttered, asking for permission to take his hand out from under the blanket. The girl's soft agreement echoed under the starlit sky, officially erasing all distance and the last bit of reserve between the two. Arin clearly felt the intense agitation in her heart whenever she heard his voice. It seemed every whispered word had the power to make her tremble. Minjeol's face flushed bright red, his eyes wide with embarrassment as the clear voice of the girl he secretly loved kept echoing and lingering in his ears. The boy's heartbeat felt like it would explode when his hand gently cupped Arin's smooth cheek, leaving him unable to maintain his usual composure. Minjeol's eyes were filled with astonishment mixed with confusion at this sudden extreme closeness, causing cold sweat to start forming on his forehead. Arin stayed silent, letting him cradle her face with his trembling hands, her dark eyes looking deep into his as if searching for an answer. The awkwardness reached its peak, making Minjeol's face turn pale with tension. He seemed to be struggling fiercely with his inner emotions. In his mind right now, there was only the very real sensation of softness, mixed with a slight dampness from the skin of the girl right beside him. Amidst the stifling atmosphere, Minjeol was about to suggest taking things further, but Arin quickly spoke up, saying she was just teasing him. He hurriedly brushed off his extreme embarrassment by caringly asking if she was feeling cold to soothe his erratic heartbeat. Arin slightly narrowed her eyes at Minjeol with a hidden meaning, then casually remarked that he still seemed to be trembling a bit in her presence. Minjeol's eyes widened in horror when he felt her breath right next to him. In the silent night enveloping the deserted road, two solitary figures sat quietly by the roadside, as if waiting for something to happen. His trembling hand gently touched Arin's smooth earlobe, lightly tucking away a stray lock of hair to get a better look at the face of the girl he loved. In that moment, both stood rooted to the spot, looking deep into each other's eyes. The space suddenly became suffocating due to their wildly beating hearts and rising shyness. Minjeol slowly moved closer until the warmth from Arin's skin spread through his mind, making him seemingly unable to contain the intense emotions burning within. When their lips were just an inch apart and a passionate kiss was about to begin to prove their feelings, suddenly a bus rushed past at breakneck speed, its glaring headlights tearing through the newly blossomed romantic atmosphere. The bus coldly rolled away, fading into the darkness of the woods, leaving the dirt road back to its original tranquility. Under the starry sky, even a stray cat quietly observed the rocky romance of the young couple caught in a half-crying, half-laughing situation. Now Minjeol and Arin could only sit with their backs to each other in a deeply awkward silence, neither daring to utter a word after the unfortunate incident. Both were immersed in extreme embarrassment, their faces flushed with beads of nervous sweat rolling down after the moment they almost touched lips. Minjeol stood rooted to the spot with his mind completely blank. He could only stammer meaningless sounds as his heartbeat refused to settle down. Arin hastily broke the stifling atmosphere by urging that it was too late, and they both needed to get up and leave immediately. The petite girl sprinted ahead, causing Minjeol to chase after her in a panic, calling out loudly and telling her to wait for him a little bit. Amidst utter confusion, Arin suddenly stopped and pointed out that Minjeol was leading her in the wrong direction, leaving the boy frozen in embarrassment. Under the dim streetlights of the night, he hesitantly double-checked whether turning this way was actually the right path. Minjeol didn't forget to turn around and remind Arin to be very careful where she stepped, urging her to hurry up to get home in time. Reaching their parting point, Arin gently motioned that she would go that way, leaving Minjeol standing behind with a chest still pounding intensely. He worriedly told her to go inside quickly lest she catch a cold, while Arin shyly replied that she would text him once she got in. The girl's slender figure gradually walked away and completely disappeared into the silent night, closing out an evening filled with unforgettable turbulence and emotions. Minjeol quietly watched her slender silhouette fading away, his heart full of worry, silently wondering if she could safely get home by herself in the dark night. He ruffled his hair with a face flushed from embarrassment, his mind still reeling from the intense vibrations that had just occurred between them. Unable to hold back, he called out Arin's name, making the girl startle and turn her head to look with a look of pure astonishment. Minjeol hurried closer and sincerely offered that, if she allowed, he wanted to walk her all the way to her door for his own peace of mind. Faced with such care, Arin clearly showed confusion on her face and hastily declined, insisting she could still handle everything on her own. The boy stubbornly reiterated that her injured leg was his fault, but Arin unexpectedly raised her voice to stop him, causing the atmosphere to suddenly fall into a deeply awkward silence. Realizing she had been a bit harsh, the girl lowered her head slightly, avoiding his gaze, and softly reaffirmed once more that everything was truly fine. Arin apologized and said goodbye to head inside, leaving Minjeol standing in a daze, watching her with eyes full of disappointment. He trudged alone down the quiet street, his heavy footsteps carrying a sense of letdown and a loneliness slowly creeping into his soul. Night completely fell, enveloping the high-rise buildings, bringing to a close a day filled with the messy, emotional roller coaster of the young couple. Minjeol softly turned the doorknob, stepping into the dark room with a heavy heart after the eventful date. He blankly closed the door. It seemed the echoes of the emotions he'd just experienced were still enveloping his mind relentlessly. The boy collapsed onto the bed in endless torment, silently telling himself he shouldn't have blurted out those abrupt words at the very end. He scratched his head in utter regret for accidentally ruining a wonderful evening just because of his own lack of restraint. The memory of their warm and genuine hand-holding suddenly rushed back, making his heart tremble once again. Minjeol tightly shut his eyes in agony, his face flushing bright red from the belated shame tormenting every cell of his body. He couldn't somehow dispel the image of his hands cradling Arin's cheeks, a moment so close it was suffocating. Suddenly springing up from the bed with rapid breaths, Minjeol panicked upon realizing he had almost completely lost his rationality. He cursed himself for being a lunatic to have dared lean in and try to give her a kiss on a whim. Even so, his eyes still clearly showed a sense of agitation as he silently recalled that in that moment, it felt like everything around them had stopped. Minjeol thought to himself that if Arin hadn't actively stepped back to avoid it, that moment on the deserted road would have taken a different turn. He stared intently at the items in the bathroom and told himself that if the things separating them hadn't been the water, things wouldn't have been left unfinished. In the boy's mind right now, a bold hypothesis emerged about whether that passionate kiss would have truly stopped there. He hurriedly splashed his face at the sink, using the cool water to extinguish the dark thoughts relentlessly burning in his head. Even with droplets of water still lingering on his face, Minjeol couldn't deny the truth that his heart was fluttering more intensely than ever. He believed that even though he hadn't received an official answer to his confession, the fact that Arin also gripped his hand tightly was a profoundly hopeful sign. Meanwhile, Arin was quietly drying her hair and getting lost in messy streams of thought about the actions of her old friend. She looked at herself in the mirror with troubled eyes, silently asking whether she too had truly started to develop feelings for him. Minjeol delivered a hard slap to his own face to sober up, trying to chase away the far-fetched illusions driving his mind crazy. He decided to flop onto the bed and force himself to sleep immediately before his brain could imagine any more bizarre things. Minjeol lay blankly on the bed, letting the silence envelop his chaotic mind after a highly eventful night. He recalled the weighty warning that Arin was under immense psychological pressure and his rushing forward would only add to her burden. The image of a melancholic Arin admitting her fear of having to rely completely on him kept returning, squeezing the young man's heart. His eyes suddenly narrowed in deep thought. He seemed to have found a crucial knot in this rocky relationship. Looking out the window, Minjeol silently blamed himself for always avoiding the truth just to protect Arin from past traumas. But then he realized if he continued letting things sink deep into ignorance, the two of them would never have a real future. It was precisely the ambiguity and hidden secrets that were the sharpest weapons capable of completely destroying the fragile soul of the girl he loved. Minjeol decided to reach out and pull an old yearbook from the bookshelf, quietly resolving to peel back every layer of the truth that had been buried for so long. He flipped through each page, trying to find a familiar name at Usiok school to begin the journey of seeking justice for Arin. His gaze stopped at an old photo of Jinsu and Heyman, two friends once bound by an eternal promise who now became the very first clues. Minjeol deduced that if those two old friends hadn't left town, it was highly likely they were attending Usiok High School. Looking back at the group photo, he realized neither attended the same middle school, so suddenly showing up and befriending them now would be extremely difficult. Even knowing he would face awkwardness, Minjeol firmly believed that only those who were once at Usiok knew exactly what had happened to Arin. Standing silently in the dark room, he told himself he needed to do something instead of just standing by watching the girl he loved drown in pain. Under the dim moonlight, Arin stared blankly out the window while Minjeol officially made up his mind to track down those old friends at all costs. The school landscape in the early morning appeared completely silent under the pale sky, signaling the start of a new day with lingering agitation from last night. Arin quietly appeared by the door, wearing a tight mask and gently bringing a hand to cover her cough, as if trying to hide the exhaustion overwhelming her frail body. Inside the classroom, there was still not a single soul. The rows of desks and chairs sat motionless, welcoming the brilliant morning sunlight shining down on the floor. The petite girl reached out to lift her backpack and silently told herself that she hadn't been able to sleep for a single second throughout the long night. Because her mind was so chaotic, she had decided to come to school very early to find a private space for herself amidst the deserted hallways. Arin sat huddled alone on the wooden stairs, her lonely and melancholic figure seemingly drowning in her own infinite sadness. Her eyes clearly showed her torment behind the mask covering her face. It seemed every thought at this moment made her heart clench even more. The image of Minjeol, with his unwavering gaze and his confession that he liked her, kept returning to her mind, igniting extreme confusion. She instinctively brought her hand to tightly grip the chest of her shirt due to a suffocating feeling, painfully realizing that in that fateful moment, she had completely frozen. Sitting quietly by the light-filled window, Arin scolded herself for being a massive fool for not being able to utter a single word in response to his sincerity. Arin blankly told herself that she had once been happier than anyone, but her selfishness after learning of his feelings left her inevitably tormented. Standing at the boundary between keeping her distance or opening up to lean on him, she warned herself not to be allowed to remain as superficial as she currently was. Her eyes clearly displayed melancholy and exhaustion, seemingly bracing herself to fight the invisible pressures weighing heavily on her mind. The image of a small Minjeol with a scratch-covered face and tears from years ago suddenly returned vividly, like a haunting obsession. The young girl asked herself how she could be so heartless as to rely on someone who had already suffered so much pain like him, only to drag him into danger. While her soul was shattering, she accidentally overheard the malicious whispers of her classmates gossiping about a crazy story. Upon realizing someone was approaching, Arin panicked and wanted to run away from there immediately to avoid the cruel rumors. Behind the mask, her eyes widened in shock as she heard them dissecting the close relationship between her and the newly transferred male student. The mocking words calling her a freak and the jealousy at seeing the two of them close had become burdens crushing the young girl's self-esteem. The tragedy reached its peak when they maliciously rumored that she was a murderer who pushed her old classmate and was now trying to seduce and kill him too. Arin stifled a choked sob as she heard her classmates sarcastically call her a murderer who targets young boys, echoing down the hallway. She covered her tear-drenched face with her hands, bitterly questioning herself about the selfish actions she had done to the one she loved. Rooted to the corner of the wall, the girl painfully realized this was the very reason she had desperately cut off contact for so many years. The cruel accusations of the past rang in her mind again, affirming that she was a cold-blooded person who only cared about herself. Arin's eyes grew clouded with pain. It seemed she had completely collapsed under the pressure of those ruthless rumors. She slumped down and sobbed uncontrollably, silently admitting that she was truly awful for developing hopes for a love that never belonged to her. The next day, the brilliant morning sunlight poured down on Sangak High School, but it seemed unable to dispel the darkness in Minjeol's heart. The classroom was still noisy with the blurry figures of students, but the absence of a familiar silhouette made the space feel strangely empty. The boy anxiously searched through his backpack, silently wondering if Arin had encountered some mishap that kept her from coming to class today. Standing before the quiet nurse's office door, Minjeol realized in shock that she had quietly gone home early and decided to evade his care once again. Minjeol couldn't help but panic when hearing the nurse announce that Arin had to leave early because of a sudden high fever reaching up to 39 degrees Celsius. He stood blankly in the middle of the deserted hallway, silently blaming himself for letting the girl he loved catch a cold after the incidents that occurred last night. The boy's eyes were glued to his phone screen with an anxiously inquiring text message, but he still hadn't received any reply. Minjeol sat dazed by the roadside with a pen in hand, his mind in total disarray, thinking about her current illness. The image of a melancholic Arin firmly pushing him away and forbidding him from stepping into her world vividly returned once again. While he was engrossed in his anxious streams of thought about Arin's safety, a voice calling his name suddenly rang out from behind. His classmates approached to invite Minjeol to hang out after the mock exams this coming Friday, but he declined, citing the reason that he had to go to the tutoring center immediately. The accompanying friends still didn't give up and continued to suggest that their group of 3 go hang out with Seonho the following Saturday. Minjeol recalculated his important date with Arin on Sunday, so he happily nodded and agreed to join his friends' plans on Saturday. The group of students walked out of the school gates together with buzzing discussions about plans to eat out and play games, bringing a close to a school day fraught with worries. Minjeol waved goodbye to his friends, but one quickly noticed he was turning in a different direction and wondered why he wasn't heading to the tutoring center. The boy forced a smile and covered it up by saying he needed to drop by another important place before starting his official class at the academy. His phone screen displayed a map routing to the Useok High School area, a journey of over 30 minutes on foot waiting for him ahead. Minjeol strode past his old Palgok school with his mind glued to the map, telling himself the location he was looking for wouldn't be hard to find since it was right next door. Amidst that peaceful space, the image of schoolgirls playing together and echoing giggles suddenly flooded back like a slow-motion film. Standing on the familiar street, Minjeol felt a chill when he caught curious eyes following him and silently wondered why everyone was acting so strangely today. He lowered his head and walked quickly through the crowd to avoid attention, trying to reassure himself that it was all just because he was overly sensitive and tense. Streaks of sunlight shone down on the young man's worried face, highlighting his deeply troubled eyes concerning a secret yet to be uncovered from the past. Suddenly, the silhouette of a familiar school uniform brushed past, freezing Minjeol in his tracks. His heart clenched when he recognized that haunting uniform color. Minjeol frantically turned his head to search the void. The image of Arin smiling on his back years ago suddenly appeared, making him utter that name while choked with emotion. Minjeol called out Arin's name loudly when he saw a familiar silhouette from behind, but that hope suddenly extinguished instantly. He stood dazed in disappointment, then told himself he was mistaken, silently urging himself to forget about it because his heart seemed to be overly sensitive. It turned out to be just a normal middle school girl from Palgok striding along the sunlit path. The murmurs about persuading friends to transfer schools among the students brushed past his ears, evoking not-so-happy memories for him. Minjeol's eyes suddenly contracted in horror as a terrible thought abruptly flashed at his mind, causing cold sweat to start beating up. He walked aimlessly with a mindset completely denying the truth, continuously repeating that such a terrible thing definitely couldn't happen. Despite trying to reassure himself, the doubts kept tormenting his mind relentlessly, forcing him to face his greatest fear. Unable to hold back any longer, Minjeol decided to approach a group of schoolgirls and hesitantly uttered an apology to grab their attention. The boy gathered all his courage and asked if they could spare some time to answer a crucial question weighing heavily on his mind. To the astonishment of her friends, a schoolgirl with long, jet-black hair slowly turned her head to look at him with a deeply suspicious gaze. The schoolgirl bewilderingly pointed at herself when she saw Minjeol approaching to strike up a conversation, causing her friends around to start whispering praises of his handsome looks. Minjeol awkwardly waved his hands, explaining that this wasn't a cheap pickup line, but merely because she looked very much like an acquaintance of his. The young girl gently stroked her hair and curiously pressed for her actual identity while waiting for a satisfactory explanation from the strange boy. The name Yerin escaping the girl's lips made Minjeol momentarily dazed. It seemed he was trying to cross-reference the information with his remaining fragmented memories. The boy hurriedly laughed it off and apologized for his disastrous mistake, while the girl just stood frozen, not understanding what was actually happening. Minjeol silently sighed, telling himself that the search for clues to help Arin would definitely never go as smoothly as he always hoped. The crowd's curiosity peaked when the schoolgirl clasped her hands and persistently asked about the true identity of the person Minjeol had been striving to find for so long. The boy was slightly startled when cornered into a tight spot. His eyes darted continuously faced with the encirclement of unfamiliar faces around him. Finally, he decided to blurt out the name Derry, causing a schoolgirl standing nearby to suddenly change her expression with a look full of horror and suspicion. Minjeol still persistently asked whether Derry was in the same class as them, but only received whispering denials in return, saying they had never heard of that name. The schoolgirl hesitantly confessed that she wasn't certain about the information sought, leaving Minjeol to merely force a smile and express his gratitude for her taking the time to think about it. Under the pale sky, Yuseok High School appeared completely silent, as if hiding terrifying secrets behind its glass windows. Minjeol decisively walked across the schoolyard, silently telling himself that this journey was merely the beginning of the battle to find the truth for Arin. He paced along the stone wall with a heavy heart, bitterly realizing that finding Derry was truly difficult when that girl was still such a massive unknown. Suddenly, a loud noise rang out from behind, shattering the silent space and signaling an unexpected event about to strike. Minjeol startled when an unfamiliar hand tightly gripped his shoulder, and was even more shocked to hear his name called intimately by a stranger. The boy stood rooted to the spot with his eyes wide in astonishment, his mind completely blank-faced with this ironic situation. He hurriedly apologized and asserted that they had never met, but the girl appeared incredibly certain of his identity. The young girl unexpectedly lunged forward to grip Minjeol's sleeve tightly and loudly called his name once more, as if to affirm the existence of a special connection. Amidst the confusion, the schoolgirl looked up at him with a flushed face and revealed that she knew him very well through the stories told by her older sister. Minjeol was utterly astonished when the strange girl confirmed this was the first time they had met in real life, and he hesitantly asked her name. The girl blushed and introduced herself as Joo Arin, at the same time explaining that Derry was just a nickname at home that her mother and older sister usually used. The boy froze when Yerin called his name correctly and curiously confirmed whether he was the close friend of her older sister. Arin? Minjeol gave a slight nod of admission in shock, while the younger sister also began to appear hesitant before making an important request. Yerin summoned all her courage to shout loudly that she really wanted to converse with him about her older sister's current situation.